When Lila Chen's mail-order groom arrived 6 months late, scarred and armed, he delivered news that shattered everything. The man she'd agreed to marry was buried in an unmarked grave. Now this dangerous replacement offered her a deal: marry him instead or lose everything to the creditors circling her failing ranch. She had 24 hours to decide. What Lila didn't know was that saying yes wouldn't just save her land. It would paint a target on her back that no wedding vows could protect her from. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the first frost turned the prairie grass to bone. Lila Chen stood in the Dust Ridge post office, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the thin yellow paper. The words swam before her eyes, reforming into shapes she didn't want to understand. Arriving Thursday. Stop, train 47. Stop, apologies for delay. Stop. No signature. No explanation for 6 months of silence. She'd written 17 letters to Thomas Garrett. 17 careful compositions where she'd measured out pieces of herself like ingredients in a recipe. Enough truth to seem honest, enough omission to avoid scaring him off. She'd told him about her father's ranch, about the debt, about the loneliness that sat in her chest like a stone. She hadn't told him that the cattle were dying, that the well was running dry, that the banker had started looking at her land the way vultures looked at something still breathing. Thomas's replies had been kind, gentle even. He wrote about books and sunsets, about wanting a quiet life after too many years of noise. He'd seemed soft in a way that made her think she might survive this arrangement. "You all right, Miss Chen?" Lila looked up. Postmaster Webb was watching her with rheumy eyes, his expression caught between curiosity and pity. Everyone in Dust Ridge knew her situation. A Chinese woman trying to hold on to a dead man's ranch was gossip enough. A Chinese woman importing a mail-order husband was practically a serialized novel. "Fine," she said, folding the telegram. "Just fine." She wasn't fine. She was drowning, and Thursday's train was either going to throw her a rope or hold her head underwater. Thursday came wearing a skin of gray clouds and bitter wind. Lila stood on the platform in her mother's blue dress, the only nice thing she owned that still fit. She'd pinned her hair up 3 times before settling on a simple bun. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, so she gripped her reticule until her knuckles went white. The station was nearly empty. A few ranch hands loitered near the freight dock, smoking and laughing about something Lila couldn't hear. Old Mrs. Patterson sat on a bench, knitting something that looked like it might become a scarf in another lifetime. Everyone else had the good sense to be somewhere warm. The train's whistle cut through the afternoon like a knife. Lila's stomach clenched. She forced herself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, like her father had taught her before he died, and left her with nothing but debt and dying cattle. The locomotive pulled in with a screech of metal and a belch of steam. Lila watched the passenger cars roll past, her eyes scanning the windows for a face that matched the one photograph Thomas had sent her, a soft-featured man with kind eyes and a slight smile. The train stopped. Doors opened. Passengers emerged. A woman with 2 small children, an elderly man in an expensive coat, 3 cowboys who immediately headed for the saloon. A traveling salesman lugging a case of samples. No Thomas Garrett. Lila's heart sank. Of course. 6 months of silence, and she'd still let herself hope. She was a fool. A desperate, broke fool who'd actually believed. Someone else stepped down from the last car. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat that had seen hard miles and a hat pulled low enough to shadow his face. He moved like violence contained, each step deliberate, controlled. A rifle case hung across his back. His right hand stayed near his hip where Lila could see the grip of a revolver. This wasn't her husband. This was someone's nightmare. The man scanned the platform with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned to catalog threats without thinking. His gaze swept past Lila, paused, returned. He started walking toward her. Lila's instinct was to run. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to move, to get away, to put distance between herself and whatever this man represented. But she'd been raised by a stubborn man, and stubbornness was the only inheritance she had left. She stayed put. The stranger stopped 3 feet away. Up close, Lila could see his face, hard angles, a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, eyes the color of slate. He was probably 30, maybe 35. He looked like he'd lived 60 years of bad decisions. Lila Chen? His voice was rough, like gravel under wagon wheels. Who's asking? Her own voice came out steadier than she felt. Name's Cade Voss. He didn't offer his hand. I need to talk to you about Thomas Garrett. The way he said it, past tense, final, made Lila's blood go cold. Where is he? Cade Voss looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes that might have been sympathy if his face had known how to arrange itself that way. Dead, he said. 3 months now. The platform tilted. Lila locked her knees to keep from swaying. Around them, the normal sounds of the station continued. The hiss of the cooling locomotive, Mrs. Patterson's knitting needles clicking, the ranch hands laughing at their own jokes. The world hadn't stopped. It just felt like it should have. How? The word came out barely above a whisper. Typhoid. Tore through the camp where we were working. Took 12 men in 2 weeks. Cade shifted his weight, uncomfortable. It was quick, if that helps. It didn't help. Nothing about this helped. Lila became aware that she was still holding the marriage papers she'd brought to sign. Official documents from a county clerk in Denver, ready to legitimize a union with a dead man. She looked down at them, at her name written in careful script next to Thomas Garrett's, and felt something crack open in her chest. You came all this way to tell me that? Her voice had an edge now, sharp enough to cut. You couldn't have sent a telegram? I could have. Cade's jaw tightened. I didn't. Why not? Because Thomas asked me to come if something happened to him, made me promise. He reached into his coat. Lila tensed, but he just pulled out an envelope. He wrote this for you, before he died. Lila stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Thomas's handwriting on the front, shaky but still legible. For Lila Chen, if I don't make it. She didn't take it, couldn't make her hands work. What does it say? She asked. I don't know. Wasn't my business to read it. Cade held the envelope out further. But he talked about you. A lot. Felt bad about the situation he was putting you in. What situation? Lila's laugh was bitter. You mean the one where I'm losing my father's ranch because the bank won't extend credit to a woman? The one where I agreed to marry a stranger because it was the only way to keep a roof over my head? That situation? That one. Cade didn't flinch. He knew, wanted to help. Well, he's dead, so I guess that plan fell through. The words came out harsher than Lila intended, but she didn't take them back. She was tired, so tired of trying to hold everything together with nothing but hope and borrowed time. Cade's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He lowered the envelope, then did something Lila didn't expect. He pulled out a second envelope. This one was newer, less worn. Thomas wasn't the only one who made promises, Cade said. He asked me to look after you if something went wrong. Help you keep your land. Lila's throat went tight. I don't need charity. Good. I'm not offering it. Cade's eyes met hers, direct and unflinching. I'm offering a solution. Not a good one, but it's what I've got. What kind of solution? Cade was quiet for a moment. Behind him, the train whistle blew, 5 minutes until departure. The ranch hands had wandered off. Mrs. Patterson had fallen asleep on her bench, knitting abandoned in her lap. Marry me instead, Cade said. For a second, Lila thought she'd misheard him. The wind, the train noise, her own exhaustion, any of those could have twisted his words into something nonsensical. But no. He was still standing there, waiting, his expression as serious as a grave. You're insane, Lila said flatly. Probably. Cade didn't disagree. But you need a husband to keep the bank from foreclosing, and I need to keep a promise to a dead man. We can help each other. You don't know anything about me. I know you're about to lose everything. I know you're desperate enough that you agreed to marry someone you'd never met based on some letters and a photograph. His bluntness was almost refreshing. I know you're still standing here listening instead of walking away, which means you're at least considering it. He wasn't wrong. Lila hated that he wasn't wrong. What do you get out of this? She demanded. Nobody makes an offer like that without wanting something. A place to stay, work, somewhere quiet. Cade's voice went flat. I've got some money saved. Enough to help with your debts? Get the ranch running again. After that, we go our separate ways if that's what you want. And if I say no, then I give you Thomas's letter, wish you luck, and get back on that train. He gestured toward the locomotive, which was starting to build steam again. But we both know what happens next. Bank takes your land, you end up working in town somewhere, if you're lucky. If you're not, he let the sentence hang. Lila wanted to hit him, wanted to scream at him for showing up, for delivering bad news, for offering her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She wanted to tell him to go to hell and take his promises with him. Instead, she heard herself ask, "What kind of work did you do with Thomas?" Cade's expression shuddered. "Various things." "That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting right now." His tone didn't invite further questions. "If we do this, you'll know what you need to know, but not here, not on a train platform where everyone in town can hear. Fair enough?" Lila didn't particularly want her business broadcast either. The train whistle blew again. 2 minutes. "I need time to think," Lila said. "You've got until that train leaves." Cade nodded toward the locomotive. "After that, the offer expires. That's not enough time to decide something like this." "No," Cade agreed. "It's not. But it's what we've got." Lila looked at him. Really looked. Saw the scar tissue on his knuckles, the worn grip of his revolver, the way he stood like someone who'd learned to sleep with one eye open. This was not a gentleman. This was not someone who wrote about books and sunsets. This was someone dangerous. But danger cut both ways. Maybe that's what she needed. "If I say yes," Lila said slowly, "I want it clear. This is business. Nothing else." "Agreed. I run the ranch. You work it. We split decisions about anything major. Fair. And if I ever tell you to leave, you leave. No arguments." Cade considered that for a moment, then nodded. "One condition." "What?" "I stay until the debt's clear and the ranch is stable. After that, you can send me packing anytime you want." It was a reasonable condition. More than reasonable, actually. Most men in his position would have demanded more. Control, ownership, rights. He was offering her an escape clause, which made her suspicious. "Why?" Lila asked. "Why would you tie yourself to a stranger's problems? Don't tell me it's just about keeping a promise to a dead man." Cade's jaw worked. For the first time since he'd stepped off the train, he looked uncomfortable. "Thomas saved my life once," he said finally, "in a way that mattered. I owed him. Still do, even though he's gone." He met her eyes. "I don't have much, Miss Chen, but I pay my debts. Always have." The train whistle screamed. Final call. Lila looked at the marriage papers in her hands, looked at the stranger in front of her, thought about her father's ranch, about the cattle dying in the fields, about the banker's cold eyes when he told her she had until the end of the month, thought about having nothing. "All right," she heard herself say. "We'll do it." Cade didn't smile, didn't react at all, really, except for a slight nod. "We'll need a witness for the papers," he said, "and somewhere to file them. Judge Morrison can do it. His office is 2 blocks from here." Lila's voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "He married my parents. He'll marry us." "Lead the way." They started walking. Behind them, the train pulled out of the station, carrying away the last chance Lila had to change her mind. Judge Morrison's office smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. The judge himself was 70, if he was a day, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen everything twice. He looked at Lila, then at Cade, then back at Lila. "You sure about this girl?" His voice was gentle, but his eyes were sharp. "I knew your father. He wouldn't want you rushed into something." "I'm sure," Lila lied. The judge's gaze shifted to Cade. "And you? You understand what you're taking on? This ranch has problems, debts. This girl's got a whole town watching her, waiting to see if she fails." "I understand, Cade said. "You love her?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "No," Cade said. No hesitation, no sugarcoating. "But I'll keep my word to her. That'll have to be enough." Judge Morrison grunted. At least you're honest. He pulled out a leather-bound book, flipped it open to a marked page. All right, let's get this done before I change my mind about enabling this particular brand of foolishness. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took less than 5 minutes. Judge Morrison read from the book in a monotone that suggested he'd performed this ritual too many times to invest it with romance. Lila and Cade stood side by side, not touching, barely looking at each other. Do you, Lila Marie Chen, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Lila's throat was dry. I do. Do you, Cade? The judge paused. What's your middle name, son? Don't have one. Do you, Cade Voss, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Rings? Neither of them had rings. The judge sighed, made a note in his book. Well, under the authority vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. He snapped the book shut. You can kiss the bride if you want, or not. Doesn't affect the legal status. They didn't kiss. Cade signed the papers in a strong, slanted hand. Lila signed beneath him, her signature looking fragile next to his. The judge witnessed, stamped, filed. Congratulations, he said without enthusiasm. Try not to kill each other. Borski shetreinem. Outside, the sun was setting, painting dust ridge in shades of amber and rust. Lila stood on the courthouse steps next to her new husband and tried to figure out what happened next. Where's your ranch? Cade asked. 6 miles north, up near Copper Creek. Lila gestured vaguely. I've got a wagon at the livery. I'll get my gear. He started to walk away, then paused. Thank you, he said, not looking at her, for saying yes. I know it wasn't easy. Before Lila could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk like a ghost. She stood there alone, a married woman for the second time in 10 minutes, and wondered what the hell she'd just done. The ride to the ranch was silent. Cade sat beside her on the wagon bench, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the landscape with that same methodical precision he'd shown at the station. Lila kept her hands on the reins and tried not to think about the fact that she was bringing a strange, armed man to her home. Her home. Possibly their home now, depending on how one interpreted the marriage contract. The thought made her skin crawl. The ranch appeared over a rise just as the last light was fading. Lila saw it through Cade's eyes and felt shame burn in her chest. The sagging barn, the broken fence posts, the house that needed paint and new shingles and about 1,000 other repairs she couldn't afford. In the paddock, her remaining cattle stood like skeletal monuments to her failure. How many head? Cade asked. 32. Down from nearly 200 when her father was alive. Lost most of them to disease and drought. Water? Well, still good. Creek dried up last summer, but it usually runs this time of year. Usually. Nothing was certain anymore. Cade nodded, taking it in. If he was disappointed, his face didn't show it. Lila pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. Her hands were shaking again. She climbed down before Cade could offer help. She didn't need his help. Didn't want to establish that precedent. Barn's that way if you want to stable the horses, she said. House is, well, it's not much, but it's dry. I'll see to the horses, Cade said. You go on in. Lila almost argued. It was her wagon, her horses, her responsibility. But exhaustion was pulling at her bones, and she didn't have the energy to fight over everything. She went inside. The house was cold and dark. Lila lit a lamp, then another, pushing back shadows that seemed deeper than usual. The main room served as kitchen and living area both. A wood stove, a rough table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books her mother had insisted on keeping even when they'd had to sell almost everything else. Lila set about building a fire. Her hands moved through the familiar motions. Kindling, paper, a match struck against rough stone. The flames caught, grew, began to push warmth into the room. She was staring into the fire when Cade came in. He moved quietly for a big man. Lila only knew he was there when she heard the door close. Horses are fed, he said. Looks like your barn roof needs work. Some of the stalls are rotted through. I know. Lila didn't turn around. Add it to the list. Cade didn't respond to that. She heard him set down his gear, the soft thump of a bedroll, the heavier sound of his rifle case. You got another room? He asked. Or should I set up in the barn? Lila finally looked at him. He stood near the door, making no move to claim space, his expression carefully neutral. There's a second room, she said. My father's. I haven't. She swallowed. It's yours if you want it. All right. Lila stood, brushed off her skirt. I'll show you. She led him down the short hallway to her father's room. The door stuck. It always did. She had to put her shoulder into it before it scraped open. The room was exactly as her father had left it, bed made with military precision. His few belongings arranged on a small dresser, a photograph of Lila's mother in a cheap frame. Cade stepped inside, looked around. If the shrine quality bothered him, he didn't show it. This'll do, he said. Lila started to leave, then stopped. There are some things we should establish, she said. Go ahead. I wake up at 5. Coffee's on by 5:15. If you want breakfast, it's at 6. Understood. Work starts at 7. There's fencing that needs mending, the barn roof like you said, and I want to move the cattle to the north pasture before the snow hits. I can handle that. And, Lila hesitated. We need to go into town tomorrow. File the marriage certificate with the county clerk. Let the bank know there's been a change in my circumstances. Cade's expression darkened slightly. The bank? Right. Is that a problem? No, just... He ran a hand over his jaw. How much do you owe? $1,500. The number sat between them like a body. My father took out a loan to buy more cattle 5 years ago. Then the drought hit, then the disease. He died before he could make good on it. Bank's been patient, but their patience ran out last month. 1,500. Cade whistled low. That's not pocket change. No. Lila's voice was flat. It's not. I've got about 800 saved. It'll help, but it won't cover everything. I wasn't asking. I know. Cade held up a hand. But we're in this together now, whether we like it or not. My money's as good as yours for keeping this place afloat. Lila wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his money, didn't need anything from him except his name on a piece of paper. But pride was expensive and she couldn't afford it. We'll talk to the bank, she said finally. See what they'll accept. Fair enough. They stood there in awkward silence, two strangers playing at being married. I should let you settle in, Lila said. There are blankets in the chest if you need more. Chamber pots under the bed. Thank you. Lila nodded and retreated to her own room before the situation could get more uncomfortable. She closed the door, leaned against it, and finally let herself shake. What had she done? She'd married a man she didn't know, didn't trust, didn't even particularly like, based on 30 minutes of conversation and desperate circumstances. She'd brought him into her home, given him access to everything she had left. And tomorrow she'd have to stand next to him in town and pretend this was normal. Pretend she wasn't terrified. Pretend that Cade Voss wasn't exactly the kind of dangerous man her father had always warned her about. Lila changed into her nightgown mechanically, blew out her lamp, and climbed into bed. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. In the other room, she could hear Cade moving around, the creak of floorboards under his weight. She stared at the ceiling and tried to sleep. It didn't come. Lila woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, still caught in the space between sleep and consciousness, she thought her father was alive. He'd always been an early riser, always had the coffee going before she woke up. Then memory crashed back. Her father was dead. Thomas Garrett was dead. And there was a stranger in her kitchen. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and steeled herself before opening the door. Cade stood at the stove, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He'd changed clothes, worn but clean work pants, a faded shirt that had seen better days. Without his coat and hat, he looked less like a gunfighter and more like a man who'd worked hard for not much return. The scar through his eyebrow was more visible in the morning light. So were the others, a thin white line along his jaw, another disappearing into his hairline, a map of violence written on skin. Morning, he said, not looking up. Coffee's ready. I can see that. Lila accepted the cup he handed her. The coffee was strong, almost bitter. You didn't have to. I was up anyway. Cade leaned against the counter, cradling his own cup. Figured I might as well make myself useful. They drank in silence. Outside, the sun was just starting to creep over the horizon, painting the world in shades of gray and gold. "What time do we need to be in town?" Kate asked. "Bank opens at 9. We should get there early before anyone else." Lila set down her cup. "People will talk. Better to control the narrative." "What narrative is that? That I married a drifter out of desperation?" Lila's voice had an edge. "That I was so desperate to keep my land I'd take anyone willing to sign the papers? That about sum it up?" "More or less." Cade nodded slowly. "You want me to be someone I'm not? Put on a show?" "I want you to not make it worse than it already is." "I can do that." He set his own cup down. "But I'm not going to pretend to be some gentle farmer. Anyone who knows anything will see through that in about 10 seconds. He was right. Cade Voss couldn't pretend to be harmless any more than a wolf could pretend to be a dog. "Just try not to shoot anyone," Lila said. The corner of Cade's mouth twitched. It might have been an attempt at a smile. "I'll do my best." They rode into Dust Ridge at 8:30, the wagon rumbling over rutted roads still hard with frost. Lila kept her eyes forward, but she could feel the stares. Mrs. Henderson pausing her sweeping to watch them pass. The Morrison boys stopping their game of stickball to gawk. Old Pete at the general store actually came out onto the boardwalk to get a better look. News traveled fast in small towns. By now, everyone knew Judge Morrison had married Lila Chen to a stranger yesterday evening. By noon, they'd have invented 6 different stories about why. The bank was a squat brick building on Main Street, designed to look more substantial than it was. Lila tied off the horses and smoothed her skirt. Beside her, Cade adjusted his coat, not hiding the gun at his hip, but not advertising it either. "Ready?" he asked. "No, me neither." They went inside anyway. The bank was exactly as Lila remembered. Dark wood, brass fittings, a couple of teller windows that were usually closed. Raymond Morrison, the banker and the judge's nephew, sat at a desk near the back. He looked up when they entered, and his expression went through several interesting transformations. Surprise, confusion, calculation. "Miss Chen," he said, standing, his eyes cut to Cade. "And guest?" "Husband," Lila corrected. "As of yesterday evening, your uncle performed the ceremony." Raymond's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "I see. That's quite sudden." "Yes, well." Lila pulled the marriage certificate from her bag, placed it on his desk. "I'm here to inform you of a change in circumstances regarding my loan." Raymond picked up the certificate, read it carefully. When he looked up, there was something new in his expression. Wariness. "Mr. Voss," he said, "welcome to Dust Ridge. I hope your intentions toward Mrs. Voss are honorable." "My intentions are to help my wife keep her land," Cade said. His voice was polite, but there was steel underneath. "Whatever that takes." "I see." Raymond set the certificate down. "Well, this does complicate things. The loan was extended to Chen Holdings, which technically is now under joint ownership," Lila interrupted. "Legally speaking, my husband's assets are my assets and vice versa, which means he can contribute to the debt repayment." "Assuming he has assets to contribute." Raymond's smile was thin. "No offense, Mr. Voss, but you just arrived in town. The bank would need some assurance of your financial stability." Cade reached into his coat. Raymond tensed. Lila saw his hand move toward the drawer where she knew he kept a small pistol, but Cade just pulled out a folded bank draft. $800, he said, placing it on the desk, drawn on First National in Denver. "You can wire them to verify if you want." Raymond picked up the draft, examined it like it might be counterfeit. Lila watched his expression shift as he realized it was genuine. "This is..." Raymond cleared his throat. "This is a significant amount, Mr. Voss. May I ask what line of work you're in?" "Various things." Cade's tone didn't invite further inquiry. "Will that satisfy you or not?" "It's a good faith payment, certainly." Raymond set the draft down carefully. "But it only covers about half the outstanding debt. The rest will be paid." Lila kept her voice steady. My husband and I will need a payment schedule. Something reasonable. Reasonable. Raymond leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Voss, your father's loan has been outstanding for nearly 3 years. The bank has been more than patient. And now you're getting paid, Cade cut in. 800 today, the rest over time. That's better than what you had yesterday, which was nothing. The two men stared at each other. Something passed between them. Some masculine negotiation that Lila couldn't quite read but understood instinctively. Raymond looked away first. Fine, he said. I'll draw up a new payment schedule. $100 a month until the balance is clear. 50, Lila countered. We need capital to rebuild the herd. 75, 60, 70, and that's my final offer. Lila looked at Cade. He gave a slight nod. 70, she agreed. Raymond pulled out paper, began writing. The scratch of his pen seemed loud in the quiet office. I'll need both your signatures, he said when he finished. And Mr. Voss, I'll need to verify this draft before I can officially accept it. Wire Denver, Cade said. I'll wait. They waited. Raymond sent his clerk to the telegraph office. The clerk returned 20 minutes later and whispered something in Raymond's ear. The banker's expression soured slightly, but he nodded. The draft is good, he said. He stamped the new payment agreement, signed it, pushed it across the desk. Congratulations. You've bought yourselves some time, Lila signed. Then Cade, his signature dark and decisive next to hers. Pleasure doing business, Cade said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. They left the bank together. Outside, the morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last of the frost. Lila felt lighter somehow, like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying for years. Thank you, she said quietly. For the money, I'll pay you back. It's not a loan. Cade untied the horses. We're married. What's mine is yours, remember? That's how this works. Is it? Lila studied him. You don't strike me as someone who shares easily. I don't, Cade admitted, but I made a promise. This is me keeping it. They climbed into the wagon. Lila picked up the reins, then hesitated. What did you do? She asked. To earn that kind of money? Cade was quiet for a long moment. I worked for people who needed problems solved, he said finally. Sometimes those problems were other people. Sometimes they were situations. I was good at making problems go away. Were you a lawman? For a while. Then I wasn't. Why? Because the law has limits. Cade's voice went flat. I didn't. Lila absorbed that. And now? Now I'm trying to be something different. He looked at her. That worked for you. It should have bothered her more. Should have sent her running back to the bank to tear up that payment agreement and send Cade Voss on his way. But Lila was tired of being bothered by things she couldn't change. And maybe, just maybe, she needed someone without limits. Someone who could do what she couldn't. It works, she said. They rode home in silence, two damaged people bound together by necessity and the ghost of a promise made to a dead man. Behind them, Dust Ridge stirred with gossip and speculation. Ahead, the ranch waited, broken, failing, but still theirs. For now, the first week passed in a rhythm of avoidance and necessity. Cade worked from sunup to sundown, moving through tasks with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to survive by being useful. He fixed the barn roof in 2 days, patched the fence line by the end of the week, and managed to coax 3 more cattle back from the canyon where they'd wandered looking for water. He didn't talk much, didn't ask for help, didn't complain when Lila left him cold biscuits for lunch because she'd forgotten to check the stove. They ate dinner in silence most nights, the scrape of forks against tin plates the only conversation. Afterward, Cade would retreat to his room while Lila cleaned up, and they'd remain on opposite sides of the house until morning came and the whole uncomfortable dance started again. It was working, in the way that barely functional things worked. The ranch wasn't thriving, but it had stopped actively dying. That was something. On the 8th day, Lila woke to find Cade already gone. His coffee cup sat washed and overturned on the counter, his bedroll was packed, and his rifle was missing from where he normally propped it by the door. A note sat on the table, written in that same strong slant. Gone to check the north pasture. Back by noon. Lila crumpled the note and tossed it into the stove. She didn't need him announcing his movements like she was some kind of supervisor. This was her land. She'd been managing it alone for 2 years before he showed up. Except she hadn't been managing it. She'd been watching it crumble. She spent the morning working in the vegetable garden behind the house, pulling weeds and checking the frost damage. Her mother had planted this garden 20 years ago, had tended it through drought and locusts, and her father's stubborn insistence that vegetables were a waste of good grazing land. Lila had inherited the stubbornness, if not the skill. Half her crops had failed last season. She was elbow-deep in dirt when she heard the horse. Not Cade's horse. She'd learned the sound of that gelding's particular gait. This was different. Multiple horses actually moving at a pace that suggested purpose rather than leisure. Lila stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked around the side of the house. 3 riders were approaching up the main road. Even from a distance, Lila could see they weren't locals. Their clothes were too fine, their horses too well kept. The man in front wore a black coat that probably cost more than Lila's entire wardrobe. She didn't recognize them. That alone was concerning. The riders pulled up about 20 feet from the house. The man in the black coat dismounted with practiced ease, handed his reins to one of the others, and approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Voss?" His voice was smooth, educated. Or should I say, Mrs. Chen. I've heard both names associated with this property. "It's Voss now," Lila said. She kept her hands visible, non-threatening, but positioned herself between the stranger and the house. "What can I do for you?" "Directly to business. I appreciate that." The man's smile widened slightly. "My name is Marcus Trent. I represent certain business interests in the territory. I'm here to discuss a proposition with your husband." "He's not here." "Pity." Trent looked around the ranch with the assessing eye of someone who knew how to calculate value. "Perhaps you could pass along a message?" "Depends on the message." "Tell him that some of his former colleagues have become aware of his current location." Trent's tone remained pleasant, conversational. "They're interested in renewing old professional relationships, very interested." Lila's stomach went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Trent's smile took on a sharper edge. "But your husband will. Tell him he has 1 week to consider the offer. After that, my employers will be, disappointed." "And if he's not interested in your employer's offer?" "Then we'll have to discuss alternative arrangements." Trent gestured to the ranch, the house, the land stretching toward the mountains. "It would be a shame if anything happened to such a lovely property. Accidents occur so frequently in these isolated areas: barn fires, cattle theft, structural collapses." The threat hung in the air like smoke. "Get off my land," Lila said quietly. Trent raised his hands in mock surrender. "No need for hostility, Mrs. Voss. I'm simply delivering a message. What happens next is entirely up to your husband." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. It would be wise not to involve the local authorities. Sheriff Bowman is a good man, I'm sure, but he's out of his depth with these matters. You understand?" He mounted his horse with the same practiced ease, tipped his hat to Lila, and rode off. His companions followed, their horses kicking up dust that hung in the still air long after they disappeared. Lila stood frozen until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then she turned and walked back to the house on legs that felt like water. Inside she paced, tried to think. Tried to figure out what the hell she'd just stepped into by marrying Cade Voss. Former colleagues, professional relationships, employers. Cade had said he'd worked for people who needed problems solved. He'd said he'd been good at making problems go away. She'd assumed that meant tracking down criminals, maybe some bounty work, the kind of gray area law enforcement that happened in territories where official law was stretched too thin. But Marcus Trent didn't talk like someone looking to hire a bounty hunter. He talked like someone who worked for the kind of people bounty hunters were supposed to catch. The sun was directly overhead when Cade finally rode back in. Lila was waiting on the porch, her father's old rifle across her knees. Cade took in the rifle, her posture, her expression. He dismounted slowly. "What happened?" he asked. "You had visitors." Lila's voice was flat. "3 men. The one in charge called himself Marcus Trent. Said he had a message for you." Something flickered across Cade's face. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. He tied off his horse and walked toward the porch. What did he say? That your former colleagues want to renew old professional relationships, that you have 1 week to consider their offer. Lila's grip tightened on the rifle. Then he made some very polite threats about what might happen to my ranch if you decline. Cade was quiet for a long moment. He looked out toward the horizon, his jaw working like he was chewing over words before deciding which ones to spit out. I'll handle it, he said finally. That's not good enough. Lila stood, the rifle still in her hands. You need to tell me what I've gotten myself into. Who are these people? No one you want to know about. Too late for that. They know where I live. They threaten my property. Lila's voice rose. I deserve to know what's coming. Cade turned to face her fully. His expression was harder than she'd seen it, closed off in a way that made him look dangerous again. Before I met Thomas, I did work for a man named Dalton Cray, he said. Cray runs operations throughout the territory, smuggling, claim jumping, protection rackets. He's got people in half the mining camps between here and Denver. I was one of those people. What kind of work? The kind that required a gun and a willingness to use it. Cade's voice had gone flat, emotionless. I collected debts, enforced agreements, made sure people understood the consequences of crossing Cray's interests. You killed people. It wasn't a question. Yes. The admission sat between them, heavy and irreversible. Why did you stop? Lila asked. Because Thomas showed me there was a different way. Cade's jaw tightened. We were working the same claim up near Leadville. Cray wanted him gone. Thomas had filed a legitimate claim to land Cray wanted. I was supposed to convince him to leave, or make him leave. Thomas knew what I was, what I'd been sent to do. He talked to me anyway, treated me like I was human instead of a weapon. So you let him live. More than that, I helped him, got him out of the territory before Cray could send someone else. Cade's voice roughened. Thomas saved my life by giving me a reason not to throw it away. I owed him everything. When he got sick and asked me to look after you, I couldn't say no. Lila processed this, trying to reconcile the man who'd fixed her barn roof with the one who'd just admitted to being a killer for hire. And now Cray's found you, she said. Looks that way. What does he want? Me back. Cade's smile was bitter. I was good at what I did. Better than the men he's got now, probably. And I left without permission. Cray doesn't forget things like that. So what are you going to do? Tell him no. Leave if I have to. Cade met her eyes. I won't bring this down on you. That wasn't part of our deal. We made a deal that you'd stay until the ranch was stable, Lila reminded him. You leave now. You break that promise. Better a broken promise than you dead because I couldn't let go of my past. Lila wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that running would solve nothing, that men like Dalton Cray didn't just let people walk away. But the truth was, she didn't know enough about this world to know what would happen next. How long do we have? She asked instead. Trent said a week, but that's for me to respond. Once I tell them no, things could move fast. Then we prepare. Lila leaned the rifle against the porch railing. You know these people. What are they likely to do? Cade looked surprised. You want to stay? Fight? This is my land, my home. I'm not abandoning it because some criminal with delusions of empire thinks he can threaten me. Lila's voice hardened. Besides, if they want you badly enough to send messengers, they'll send worse when you refuse. Running just means we face it somewhere else with less cover and fewer advantages. You're talking about a fight you might not win. I've been fighting a fight I might not win for 2 years. Lila descended the porch steps, stood close enough to Cade that she could see the scar tissue up close, the evidence of a violent life written on his skin. At least this enemy I can shoot. For the first time since she'd met him, Cade almost smiled. You're tougher than you look. I've had to be. Lila turned toward the barn. Come on, if we're doing this, we need to fortify. And you need to teach me how to actually use this rifle instead of just threatening people with it. They spent the afternoon preparing for war. Cade walked the property with a tactical eye, pointing out sight lines, weak points, places where attackers might approach under cover. He showed Lila how to properly shoulder her father's rifle, how to account for wind and distance, how to breathe and squeeze instead of jerking the trigger. You're not a bad shot. he said, after she'd put 3 rounds within a hand's width of center on a target he'd set up against the barn. Just untrained. My father believed women shouldn't handle firearms. Lila reloaded, sighted, fired again. This one went dead center. Said it wasn't natural. Your father was wrong. Kate adjusted her stance slightly, correcting the angle of her shoulder. Natural doesn't matter when someone's shooting at you. Accurate does. They worked until the sun started sinking toward the mountains. By then, Lila's shoulder ached from the rifle's kick, and her hands were shaking from adrenaline and exertion. But she could hit what she aimed at more often than not. That'll do for today, Cade said. Tomorrow we'll work on moving while shooting and reloading under pressure. Lila lowered the rifle, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Close enough that she could smell gunpowder and sweat and something else. Leather, maybe, or the particular scent that came from someone who spent their life outdoors. She stepped back, put distance between them. I'll make dinner, she said. I'll check the perimeter, make sure Trent didn't leave anyone watching. He disappeared into the gathering dusk while Lila returned to the house. Inside, she set about making a meal from what little they had. Beans, bacon, hard bread that needed soaking to be edible. Her hands moved through familiar motions while her mind spun through unfamiliar territory. She'd married Cade to save her ranch. Now she might have to fight alongside him to keep it. The irony wasn't lost on her. Cade returned as she was setting plates on the table. He'd brought in more wood for the fire, stacked it neatly by the stove without being asked. No signs of surveillance, he reported. Doesn't mean they're not out there. But if they are, they're better than I expect. They ate in silence, but it was different from the silence of previous nights. This felt less like avoidance and more like 2 soldiers conserving energy before battle. Tell me about them, Lila said finally. Cray's men. What should I expect? Cade set down his fork. They'll come at night, probably. 3 or 4 of them if they're smart, enough to overwhelm, but not so many they get in each other's way. They'll try to burn us out first, force us into the open where they can control the engagement. And if that doesn't work, then they'll get creative, poison the well, kill the livestock, make it impossible for you to stay even if you survive. Cade's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was describing a recipe instead of potential murder. Cray doesn't like leaving loose ends. If he can't have me working for him, he'll want me dead, and anyone associated with me. That's comforting. You asked. Cade resumed eating. But there's another option. What? I could go meet with him, negotiate directly. Lila's hand stilled. Negotiate what? Terms. Maybe there's something else he wants more than my service. Information about his competitors, locations of mining operations I scouted, names of people who might be willing to turn. Cade's expression was carefully neutral. I've got leverage. Question is whether it's enough. And if it's not, then at least I tried talking before the shooting starts. It was a reasonable plan. Almost too reasonable for a man who'd admitted to being a hired killer, which made Lila suspicious. You're planning something else, she said. Something you're not telling me. Cade looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, rough sound without much humor in it. You're sharp, he said. Thomas told me you were, but I didn't believe him. What aren't you telling me? That if I go meet with Cray, there's a decent chance I don't come back. Cade leaned back in his chair. Not because he'll kill me, though that's possible, but because he'll make an offer I can't refuse. Money, power, safety, for you. All I'd have to do is come back to work. And you'd take that offer? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. A week ago, I would have said no without thinking. But that was before I met you. Before I saw what you're trying to protect here. He gestured around the modest house. This place matters to you in a way most things have never mattered to me. If going back to Cray keeps you safe, keeps your land intact, that might be worth it. Lila's chest felt tight. I don't want you to sacrifice yourself for my ranch. Why not? You were willing to marry a stranger for it. That was different. How? Because marrying him had felt like a business transaction, impersonal and clean. This felt like something else entirely, like Cade might actually give a damn whether she lived or died, and she had no idea what to do with that. "Just promise me something," Lila said instead of answering. "Promise you won't make any decisions without telling me first. We're in this together. You said so yourself. That means I get a say in how it plays out." Cade studied her across the table. Whatever he saw in her expression made him nod. "All right," he said. "No decisions without talking to you first." "Thank you." They finished dinner in companionable quiet. Afterward, Cade helped with the dishes, another first, and they stood side by side at the wash basin, him washing while she dried. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, "for bringing this to your door. You deserved better." "Better than what? A failing ranch and mounting debt?" Lila set down a plate, harder than she intended. "You gave me a chance to keep my land. Whatever comes next, at least I had that." "Still, this isn't what you signed up for." "No," Lila agreed, "but then you're not what I signed up for either. Seems like we're both improvising." That almost smile flickered across Cade's face again. "Seems like." The next 3 days fell into a new pattern. Mornings meant weapons training, Lila learning to shoot, reload, move. Afternoons meant fortification, boarding up windows, clearing sight lines, stockpiling ammunition and supplies. Evenings meant planning, talking through scenarios, preparing for violence they both hoped might not come. On the fourth day, a rider approached at mid-morning. Lila saw him first, a lone figure on a bay horse, moving at a steady pace but not hurrying. She called for Cade, who emerged from the barn with his rifle already in hand. "You expecting anyone?" he asked. "No." They waited, tense, as the rider drew closer. It wasn't until he was 50 yards out that Lila recognized him. "That's Sheriff Bowman," she said, lowering her rifle. Cade didn't lower his. "Trent said not to involve the law." "I didn't. He's here on his own." Sheriff Bowman pulled up 20 feet from the house, the same distance Marcus Trent had kept, Lila noted. But where Trent had radiated calculated menace, Bowman just looked tired. He was a big man gone soft around the middle, with a mustache that had been fashionable 15 years ago and eyes that had seen too much disappointment. He'd been sheriff for 20 years, had known Lila's father, had looked the other way when Lila struggled to make loan payments because he was a decent man in a job that didn't leave much room for decency. "Lila," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His gaze shifted to Cade. "Mr. Voss?" "Sheriff." Cade's voice was carefully neutral. "Something we can help you with?" "That depends." Bowman shifted in his saddle. "I got a visit yesterday from a man named Marcus Trent. Told me there was a new resident in the area who might be of interest to territorial law enforcement. Gave me a name, Cade Voss. Said there might be outstanding warrants." "Are there?" Lila asked before Cade could respond. "No, I checked." Bowman's gaze stayed on Cade. "But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be. I'm familiar with Dalton Cray's operations, Mr. Voss, and I'm familiar with the kind of men he employs. You match the description of someone I've been hearing about for 3 years, someone very good at making problems disappear." Cade said nothing. "So I'm here to ask you directly," Bowman continued. "Are you planning to bring trouble to my territory?" "Not planning to," Cade said, "but it might come anyway." "And if it does?" "Then I'll deal with it. That's not how the law works." "The law." Cade's voice hardened. "With respect, Sheriff, the law hasn't touched Dalton Cray in 10 years of operation. He's got judges paid off, deputies on his payroll, and enough money to make inconvenient evidence disappear. You want to go after him through legal channels, be my guest. But don't expect me to wait around while you file paperwork." Bowman's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to prevent bloodshed." "So am I. But some people only understand one language." The two men stared at each other, a standoff of philosophies and hard experience. "Sheriff," Lila said, stepping between them, "my husband and I aren't looking for trouble. But if someone threatens my land, I will defend it, with whatever means necessary." Bowman looked at her, something sad crossing his features. "Your father would be disappointed to hear you talk like that." "My father's dead, and he left me with debts I couldn't pay and a ranch I couldn't run alone." Lila's voice didn't waver. "I'm doing what I have to do to survive. If that disappoints anyone's memory, that's their problem." Bowman sighed. If shooting starts, I'll have to investigate. You understand that? We understand, Cade said. And if I find evidence of murder, you'll find evidence of self-defense. Cade's tone left no room for argument. If Cray's men come here, they're the aggressors, not us. That's a fine line, Mr. Voss. Maybe, but it's the line I'm standing on. Bowman nodded slowly, like he'd expected this answer and wasn't happy about being right. I'll do what I can to keep things peaceful, he said, but my jurisdiction is limited and my resources are thin. If this escalates beyond what I can handle, he let the sentence trail off. We'll manage, Lila said. I hope so. Bowman gathered his reins. For what it's worth, Lila, I'm sorry. You deserve better than this. He rode off before she could respond. Cade watched him go, his expression unreadable. He's a good man in a bad situation. That describes most people I know, Lila said. That night, Lila woke to the smell of smoke. Not the clean smell of a wood fire, but something else. Something acrid and wrong. She was out of bed and moving before her mind fully caught up, grabbing her rifle and bursting into the hallway. Cade was already there, shirtless and armed, his face hard in the dim light filtering through the windows. Barn, he said shortly. They ran outside together. The barn was burning, not fully engulfed yet, but flames were licking up the north wall where the old wood was driest. In the paddock, the cattle were panicking, slamming against the fence. Get water, Cade ordered. I'll get the animals out. Lila didn't argue. She ran for the pump while Cade sprinted toward the paddock. Behind her, she heard him swearing as he wrestled with the gate latch, then the thunder of hooves as the cattle broke free. She worked the pump with desperate speed, filling bucket after bucket and hauling them toward the barn. The fire was spreading faster than she could work, eating through sun-dried wood like paper. Smoke stung her eyes, made her cough. Cade appeared beside her, took a bucket, threw water at the base of the flames. It's not enough, he shouted over the roar. We need to let it burn. Like hell, Lila shot back. There's equipment in there we can't replace. And you'll die trying to save it. Cade grabbed her arm. Lila, it's gone. We need to fall back. She wanted to fight him, wanted to keep throwing water at flames that were going to consume the barn no matter what she did. But she'd learned enough about survival to know when to retreat. They backed away and watched the barn burn. It took 2 hours to collapse completely. By then, the sun was coming up, painting the destruction in shades of gold and ash. The cattle had scattered into the hills. The barn was a smoking skeleton, and somewhere out in the darkness, someone was watching. Cray's opening move, Cade said quietly. He's telling us he can reach us anytime he wants. Lila's hands were blistered from the pump handle, her face streaked with soot and sweat. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything except a cold, hard fury. Then we tell him he made a mistake, she said. Cade looked at her. How? By being ready when he comes back. Lila turned toward the house, toward the rifles waiting inside. He wants to burn me out? Let him try. Next time we'll be waiting. They spent the rest of that day in preparation, but something had changed. The attack had stripped away the last pretense of civility, the thin hope that this might resolve peacefully. Now it was just a matter of time before the next escalation. The week deadline came and went. Cade sent no message to Trent or Cray. The response was delivered 2 nights later. Lila was checking the water supply when she heard horses. Not cautious horses trying to approach quietly, but a group moving with the confidence of people who didn't care about being heard. She ran for the house, shouting for Cade. He met her at the door, already armed. How many? He asked. 4, maybe 5. Lila grabbed her rifle from where it leaned against the wall. Coming from the east. Get to the window. 2nd floor, south corner, best sight line. Cade was already moving, distributing ammunition, checking loads. Don't shoot unless they shoot first. What are you going to do? Try one more time to talk. He stepped out onto the porch while Lila ran upstairs, positioned herself at the window he'd specified. From here, she could see the riders approaching, 5 men, heavily armed, moving in loose formation. The one in front was Marcus Trent. They pulled up at that same 20-foot mark. Trent dismounted, but this time his companions did too, spreading out in a semicircle that looked casual, but wasn't. Mr. Voss, Trent called out. I'm disappointed. I expected a response to our generous offer. I'm responding now, Cade said from the porch. Tell Cray the answer is no. I'm afraid that's not acceptable. Trent's smile was thin. Mr. Cray has invested considerable resources in your development. He views your departure as breach of contract. I don't recall signing a contract. Nevertheless, Trent gestured to the burned barn. These escalations are unfortunate but necessary. Mr. Cray is prepared to be generous if you return willingly. If you don't, well, Mrs. Voss seems quite attached to this property. It would be a shame if she lost it entirely. From her window, Lila saw Cade's posture shift, saw his right hand drift toward his gun. Leave her out of this, Cade said quietly. I'm afraid she's already in it. Trent's voice carried clearly in the still air. The moment she married you, she became leverage. Mr. Cray understands the value of leverage. Last chance, Trent. Take your men and go. Or what? You'll shoot us? There are 5 of us and 1 of you. Even if you're as good as your reputation suggests, the math doesn't favor you. Cade smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. Who says there's only 1 of me? He asked. And Lila, from her window, sighted down a rifle and put a round into the dirt 2 inches from Trent's boot. The effect was immediate. Trent jumped back. His men drew their weapons, but they were looking in the wrong direction. At Cade, not up at the window where Lila was already chambering another round. My wife, Cade said pleasantly, is a decent shot. And before you consider your next move, you should know there are 2 more rifles covering you from positions you haven't spotted yet. A bluff? There were no other rifles. But Trent didn't know that. His eyes darted around, trying to locate threats he couldn't see. This is your final warning, Cade continued. Tell Cray I'm not coming back. Tell him if he sends anyone else to my land, they won't leave alive. And tell him that if anything happens to my wife, I will hunt him personally. I know where he lives, where he works, where he sleeps. I'll kill everyone he cares about and make him watch before I end him. That's not a threat. It's a promise. The silence stretched out. Trent's calculation was visible on his face, weighing options, measuring risks, trying to decide if Cade was bluffing. Finally, he nodded. I'll deliver your message. But, Mr. Voss, you're making a mistake. Mr. Cray doesn't respond well to threats. Then he should stop making them. Trent and his men remounted, their movements stiff with restrained anger. They rode off slowly, deliberately, making sure Cade knew they weren't running. Only when they were completely out of sight did Lila lower her rifle. Her hands were shaking. She'd aimed at the dirt, but she could have just as easily aimed at Trent's chest. Would have, if he'd drawn his weapon. She'd never pointed a gun at a person before. Never seriously considered killing someone. Now she'd done both in the space of a minute. She made her way downstairs on unsteady legs. Cade was still on the porch, watching the horizon. You all right? He asked without turning around. I don't know. Lila's voice sounded distant. Should I be? No. Cade finally looked at her. But you did good. You didn't hesitate. Is that a good thing? In this situation? Yes. He gestured for her to come stand beside him. They'll be back. Probably with more men. Probably soon. I know. You could still leave. Take what money we have. Go somewhere Cray can't find you. Start over. This is my home. It's dirt and wood. You can find more dirt and wood. Not with my parents buried in it. Lila's voice hardened. Not with 20 years of my father's work soaked into every fence post. This is mine, Cade. I'm not giving it up. Cade nodded slowly. Then we make our stand here. Together? He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Together. The word felt like an oath, like a promise worth more than the ones they'd made in Judge Morrison's office. The legal binding that had started this whole mess. This was real. This was chosen. This was dangerous. And Lila found she didn't care. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't facing the fight alone. Whatever came next, at least she had that. They had 3 days. 3 days of waiting, watching, preparing for violence that felt as inevitable as the winter pushing down from the mountains. Cade spent most of that time reinforcing the house, moving furniture to create barriers, positioning ammunition at strategic points, mapping every angle of approach. Lila helped where she could, But mostly she watched him work and tried not to think about what it meant that he knew exactly how to prepare a house for a siege. On the second day, Sheriff Bowman rode out again. "There was an incident in town last night," he said without preamble. His face was gray, his eyes haunted. "The Morrison family, Raymond's cousins from the homestead east of here, someone burned their barn, shot their dog, left a message carved into their door." "What did it say?" Cade asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "Harboring criminals has consequences." Bowman's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "They're good people, Cade. They've got 3 children. They didn't do anything except live in the same county as you." Lila felt ice spread through her chest. "They're sending a message." "No," Cade said quietly. "They're clearing the board, making sure no one helps us when it comes down to it." Bowman's hands tightened on his reins. "I can't protect everyone. I don't have the men or the resources. Cray knows that." "Then don't try to protect everyone." Cade's voice was flat. "Just make sure people know to stay inside tomorrow night. Lock their doors, keep their guns close." "Tomorrow night?" Bowman's eyes narrowed. "You know something." "I know how men like Cray operate. He's made his point. Now he'll finish it." Cade gestured toward the horizon where storm clouds were gathering. "Weather's turning. Perfect cover for what comes next. If I were planning this, I'd move tomorrow night. That's 24 hours. Then you've got 24 hours to get people ready." Cade's tone didn't invite argument. "Tell them to stay home, stay quiet. This doesn't involve them anymore. It involves everyone if there's a massacre in my territory." "There won't be a massacre." Cade's voice went hard. "Because we'll be ready." Bowman looked at Lila. "You're really going to do this? Stand and fight?" "What choice do I have?" Lila met his gaze without flinching. "Run, and they'll burn everything I own anyway. At least this way I control the terms. Your father is dead, Sheriff, and his opinions don't help me now." Lila's voice cut like a knife. "I appreciate your concern, but unless you're planning to arrest Dalton Cray and all his men tonight, there's nothing more to discuss." Bowman flinched. For a moment he looked like he wanted to argue, to assert some kind of legal authority over a situation that had moved beyond law's reach. Then he just looked tired. "I'll spread the word," he said. "Keep people inside. But if civilians get hurt—" "They won't," Cade said. "We'll make sure of it." Bowman rode off, and Lila watched him disappear over the ridge with something that felt like grief. Another bridge burned. Another connection severed. She was running out of neutral ground. "He's right to be angry," Cade said, reading her expression. "None of this would be happening if I hadn't shown up." None of this would be happening if Dalton Cray wasn't a criminal who thinks he owns people. Lila turned back toward the house. "You didn't create this situation. You're just the excuse." They spent the rest of that day in tense preparation. Cade showed Lila how to reload in the dark, how to estimate distance by sound, how to tell the difference between covering fire and a real assault. The lessons had a grim finality to them, like he was cramming years of experience into hours because he knew there wouldn't be time later. "What if we lose?" Lila asked during a break, the question escaping before she could stop it. Cade was checking the load on his revolver, his movements precise and mechanical. He didn't look up. "Then you run," he said. "There's a horse saddled in what's left of the barn. Money in my coat pocket. You take both and you ride hard for Denver. Don't stop in Dust Ridge. Don't try to settle anything. Just disappear." "What about you?" "I'll buy you time." "That's not an answer." Cade's hand stilled. He finally looked at her, and there was something bleak in his eyes. "I've done things, Lila. Bad things. If this is how it ends for me, that's not unfair." He holstered the revolver. "But you don't deserve to go down with me, so if it goes wrong, you run. Promise me." "I'm not promising that." "Lila." "No." Her voice was firm. "We stand together or we fall together. That's the deal now. You don't get to change the terms because you've got some twisted idea about what you deserve." They stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills that had nothing to do with Dalton Cray and everything to do with 2 broken people trying to figure out if they were worth saving. "You're stubborn," Cade said finally. "Yes, and you're reckless. We make quite a pair." Almost smile flickered across his face. That we do. The storm hit that evening, rolling in from the north with wind that shook the windows and rain that drummed against the roof like gunfire. Lila and Cade ate a cold dinner, no fire, no light that might give away their positions. They sat in the darkness and listened to the storm rage outside. "Tell me about Thomas," Lila said quietly. "What was he really like?" Cade was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Kind, almost annoyingly kind. The type of man who'd give you his last dollar and then apologize for not having more. He shifted in the darkness. He saw the best in people, even when there wasn't much best to see. Is that why he wrote to me? Because he saw something worth saving? Probably. Thomas believed everyone deserved a second chance. Hell, he gave me one when I didn't deserve it. Cade's laugh was bitter. He talked about you constantly. About your letters, your father's ranch, the way you described the mountains. He was excited to meet you, to build something good. And then he died. And then he died. Cade's voice went flat. Stupid, random, unfair, all that kindness, all those plans, gone because of bad water and worse luck. Lila absorbed this. Do you think he'd approve of what we're doing? No. Cade didn't hesitate. Thomas hated violence. Would have tried to talk this out, find some peaceful solution. He'd be disappointed in both of us right now. Good thing he's not here then. Yeah. Cade's voice softened. Good thing. They lapsed into silence again, but it was comfortable now. Two people waiting for the same storm, finding strange solace in shared fear. Lila must have dozed off at some point, because she woke with a start to Cade's hand on her shoulder. They're here, he whispered. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She grabbed her rifle, moved to the window Cade indicated. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle, and in the weak moonlight filtering through the clouds, she could see movement, shapes. At least 6 of them, maybe more, spreading out in a loose perimeter around the house. They moved with military precision, using the darkness and the remaining storm noise as cover. More than I expected, Cade murmured beside her. Cray really wants this finished. Can we hold against that many? Depends on how smart they are. Cade's voice was clinical, detached. If they rush us all at once, probably not. If they try to be tactical, we've got a chance. One of the shapes broke from the group, moved closer to the house. Even in the dim light, Lila recognized Marcus Trent's expensive coat. Mr. Voss, Trent called out. I'm here to offer one final opportunity for peaceful resolution. Come out and talk. No violence necessary. Cade didn't respond. Mr. Voss, please be reasonable. Mr. Cray simply wants what belongs to him. Your service in exchange for your wife's safety. Surely that's a fair trade. Still nothing. Trent's posture shifted. Very well, you leave us no choice. He retreated to the perimeter. For a moment, everything was still. Then the world exploded. The first shots came from multiple directions at once, deliberate, coordinated fire designed to pin them down. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Lila dropped below the window line, her heart hammering. Return fire, Cade ordered. Controlled bursts. Make them think there's more of us. Lila rose, sighted on a muzzle flash, squeezed the trigger. Her rifle kicked. She didn't know if she hit anything, but the muzzle flash stopped. She ducked it down, moved to a different window, fired again. Cade was doing the same on the other side of the house, his movements fluid and practiced. He fired twice, moved, fired again, creating the illusion of multiple defenders. The attackers adjusted their tactics. The gunfire slackened, became more sporadic. They were probing now, looking for weak points. They're going to try to flank us, Cade said. Watch the back. Lila moved to the rear window just as a figure darted across the open ground toward the burned barn. She fired, missed, fired again. This time the figure went down. She'd just shot someone, maybe killed them. There wasn't time to process that. Another figure was moving, this one toward the house's blind spot on the east side. Lila swung her rifle, fired. The figure dove for cover. Good, Cade called out. Keep them scattered. But they weren't scattered enough. Lila could see the pattern forming, a classic pincer movement, forces converging from multiple angles. They were outnumbered and running out of ammunition. Cade, she called out. "They're boxing us in." "I know." His voice was tight. "Get ready to fall back to the second floor." Before Lila could respond, something crashed through the front window, a bottle with a burning rag stuffed in the neck. It shattered against the far wall and flames erupted across the old wood floor. "Fire!" Lila shouted, already moving. "They're trying to burn us out." Cade swore, fired twice more out the window, then ran for the kitchen. He grabbed the water bucket, threw it on the flames. It helped, but not enough. The fire was spreading fast, feeding on dry wood and years of accumulated dust. Another bottle came through a different window, then another. "Upstairs," Cade ordered. "Now!" They ran for the stairs as the ground floor filled with smoke and fire. Lila's eyes were streaming, her lungs burning. She could hear shouting outside, the attackers coordinating, moving closer now that the fire was doing their work for them. They made it to the second floor. Cade slammed the door at the top of the stairs, shoved a dresser against it. "That won't hold long," he said. "We need another way out." "There isn't one. Just the roof." Cade moved to the window, looked out. "Roof it is, then." He smashed out the glass with his rifle butt, stuck his head out to check the angle. Gunfire immediately erupted from below, bullets chewing up the window frame. Cade jerked back inside. "Well, that's not ideal," he muttered. Below them, the fire was roaring now. Lila could hear the crackle of burning timber, feel the heat rising through the floorboards. Smoke was seeping up through the cracks. "We're trapped," she said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Cade looked at her and something in his expression changed. The hard edges softened. He reached out, grabbed her hand. "No, we're not," he said. "We just need to change their expectations." "How?" "By doing something stupid." He moved back to the window, fired 3 quick shots in different directions. "They think we're cornered, think we'll try to escape or surrender. We're going to do neither." "What are we going to do?" "We're going to attack." Lila stared at him. "That's insane." "Probably, but they've committed to this assault. They're exposed, focused on the house. If we can get outside and behind them." "We could even the odds," Lila finished. She looked at the burning house around them, at the smoke thickening in the air, at the man who'd become her husband in a ceremony that felt like it happened in another lifetime. "All right, how do we get out?" Cade pointed to the west window, the one facing away from most of the gunfire. "Roof's lowest there. We drop to the ground, use the smoke for cover, circle around. And then we make them regret coming here." It was a terrible plan, the kind of plan that got people killed, but sitting here waiting to burn or be shot wasn't any better. "Let's go," Lila said. They moved to the west window. Cade went first, climbing out onto the sloped roof with his rifle slung across his back. The shingles were slick with rain, treacherous. He made it to the edge, paused, then dropped out of sight. Lila followed, her heart in her throat. The roof felt like it might give way any second, rotten wood straining under her weight. She reached the edge, looked down. It was maybe 12 feet to the ground. Not a fatal drop, but enough to break something if she landed wrong. Below her, Cade was already moving, using the smoke from the burning house as cover. He gestured urgently for her to jump. Lila jumped. The landing knocked the wind out of her, sent her rifle skittering across the muddy ground. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then Cade was there, hauling her to her feet, pressing her rifle back into her hands. "Move!" he hissed. They ran, bent low, using every bit of cover they could find. Behind them, the house was fully engulfed now, flames shooting through the roof. The attackers were still focused on it, still waiting for Lila and Cade to emerge from the front or try to escape out the back. No one was watching the sides. Cade led them in a wide arc, coming up behind where he'd seen muzzle flashes earlier. He moved like a ghost, each step placed with precision, making no sound. Lila tried to match him, but she felt clumsy, loud, certain at any moment someone would spot them. No one did. They came up behind a man crouched near the tree line, his attention fixed on the burning house. Cade didn't hesitate. He brought his rifle up and fired once. The man dropped. The gunshot alerted the others. Suddenly, the tactical situation reversed. The attackers were caught between the burning house and an enemy at their backs. Confusion rippled through their formation. Cade fired again, then grabbed Lila's arm and pulled her to new cover before return fire could find them. They were moving constantly now, shooting and relocating, creating the impression of multiple attackers coming from the darkness. Lila saw a figure turning toward them, bringing up a shotgun. She fired without thinking. The figure went down. She didn't know if it was a kill shot, didn't have time to care. They kept moving, kept shooting. The attackers were breaking formation now, falling back, trying to regroup. But Cade didn't give them the chance. He pressed the attack, driving them back toward the open ground where they had no cover. Lila followed his lead, firing when he fired, moving when he moved. Her rifle was almost empty. Her hands were shaking. But she kept going because stopping meant dying, and she wasn't ready to die for Dalton Cray's wounded pride. Then she saw Trent. He was trying to rally his men, shouting orders that were getting lost in the chaos. His expensive coat was streaked with mud. His face was a mask of frustrated rage. Their eyes met across the burning landscape. Trent raised his pistol. So did Lila. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the woman fighting for her home and the man trying to take it away. Everything else faded. The fire, the gunshots, Cade shouting something she couldn't hear. Just her, just Trent, just the trigger under her finger. She fired. So did he. So did someone else. 3 shots. So close together, they sounded like one. Trent went down. His pistol fell from nerveless fingers. He clutched his chest, blood spreading across that expensive coat, his expression one of absolute surprise. Lila stood frozen, smoke drifting from her rifle barrel. Had she hit him? She thought she had, but there had been 3 shots. One of them was hers. One was Trent's. She'd felt it pass close enough to stir her hair. The third, she turned. Cade was standing 20 feet away, his rifle still raised, aimed at where Trent had been. His face was hard, emotionless. "You good?" he called out. Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. The remaining attackers were retreating now, dragging their wounded, abandoning the fight. They'd lost their leader and their momentum. Whatever pay Cray had promised them, it wasn't enough to die for. Within minutes, the gunfire stopped completely. The attackers vanished into the darkness, and suddenly the only sound was the roar of the burning house and Lila's ragged breathing. She walked over to where Trent lay. He was still alive, barely, his breath coming in wet, struggling gasps. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "Should have taken the deal," he wheezed. "Should have left us alone," Lila replied. Trent's eyes found hers. For a moment, something almost like respect flickered there. Then he coughed once, twice, and went still. Lila stood over his body and felt nothing. No triumph, no guilt, just a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to pull her down into the mud. Cade appeared beside her, checked Trent's pulse out of habit more than hope. "He's gone," he confirmed. He looked at Lila. "You hit?" "No, you?" "Grazed, nothing serious." He gestured to his left arm, where his shirt was torn and dark with blood. "We should check the perimeter, make sure they're really gone." They did a sweep of the property, weapons ready, expecting ambush at every turn. But the attackers were truly gone, fled into the night carrying their casualties and their failure. When they made it back to the house, or what remained of it, the fire was starting to die down. There wasn't much left to burn. Lila stood and watched her home collapse into ash and ember and tried to figure out what she felt. "I'm sorry," Cade said quietly, "about the house. It was just wood." Lila's voice was flat. "We're alive. That's what matters." "Is it?" She looked at him, really looked, saw the blood on his arm, the soot on his face, the weariness in his eyes that spoke of too many fights, too many losses, too many times having to choose between bad and worse. "Yeah," she said, "it is." They stood together in the ruins of her life and watched the sun start to rise. Around them, the evidence of violence, bodies they'd have to deal with, blood soaking into the earth, the burned skeleton of what used to be home. But they were standing. They were breathing. They'd survived. As the first light of dawn touched the mountains, Lila heard horses approaching. She tensed, reached for her rifle. "Easy," Cade said. "That's Bowman." The sheriff rode up with 3 deputies, all of them armed, all of them looking grim. They took in the scene, the burned house, the bodies, Lila and Cade standing in the middle of it all like survivors of a war. Bowman dismounted slowly. I heard the gunfire, took time to gather men. His voice was careful, controlled. What happened here? Self-defense, Cade said. They attacked. We defended. That's the whole story. Bowman walked over to Trent's body, studied it with the detached interest of someone who'd seen too much death to be shocked by it anymore. Marcus Trent, he said, one of Cray's top men. This is going to have consequences. Let it, Lila said. I'm done being afraid of Dalton Cray. Bowman looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. There are 5 other bodies scattered around your property, all of them armed, all of them on your land. He paused. I can call this what it is, self-defense, but there will be questions, investigations. Then investigate, Cade said. You won't find anything except people defending their home from criminals. And Cray? What happens when he finds out you killed 6 of his men? He'll know where to find me. Cade's voice was flat, and he'll know what happens when he sends people after what's mine. Bowman absorbed that. He looked at the bodies, at the burned house, at 2 people who'd somehow survived what should have killed them. I'll file the report as justified self-defense, he said finally. But Cade, you need to understand, this doesn't end here. Cray won't let this go. I'm counting on it, Cade said. The sheriff shook his head like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both. Bowman and his deputies spent the next hour cataloging the scene, taking statements, removing bodies. Through it all, Lila sat on a rock near what used to be her porch and watched them work. Cade stayed close, protective in a way that would have annoyed her a week ago, but now just felt necessary. When the law finally left, taking the last of the bodies with them, Lila and Cade were alone again. The sun was fully up now, revealing the full extent of the devastation. The house was gone. The barn was already gone. Most of her equipment had burned, but the land was still there. The mountains, the creek that would run again when the snow melted, the bones of something that could be rebuilt. We should get that arm looked at, Lila said, nodding to Cade's wound. Later. First we need to secure the property. Make sure no one else is coming. Cade. She stood, walked over to him. It's over. For now, at least. Let me help you. He looked like he wanted to argue. Then he just nodded, let her lead him to what remained of the water pump. She cleaned the wound as best she could, a deep graze that had bled a lot, but hadn't hit anything vital. Her hand shook as she worked, the adrenaline finally wearing off and leaving her hollow. You did good tonight, Cade said quietly. Better than good. You saved both our lives. We saved each other. Lila tied off the makeshift bandage. That's what this is now, isn't it? Partnership? Yeah. Cade's voice was soft. I guess it is. They sat together in the ruins as the day grew brighter, 2 people who'd started as strangers and become something else through fire and blood and necessity. The fight wasn't over. Dalton Cray was still out there, still dangerous. The house was gone. Winter was coming, and they had nothing but each other and raw determination. But they'd held the line. They'd faced the worst Cray could throw at them and survived. That had to count for something. Lila looked at Cade, at the man who'd walked into her life carrying death and promises in equal measure, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love. It was too soon for that, and they were both too damaged. But something. Connection, maybe. Trust earned in the only currency that mattered. What now? She asked. Cade surveyed the wreckage, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a real smile this time, not that bitter, almost expression he usually wore. Now? He said. Now we rebuild. The word sounded simpler than it was. Rebuild meant starting from ash and rubble with almost nothing. It meant sleeping in the remaining cattle shelter that first night, huddled against the cold with saddle blankets for warmth. It meant waking up to frost on the ground, and the reality that everything Lila had tried to preserve was gone anyway. But they were alive, and the land was still theirs. By mid-morning, wagons started arriving. The first belonged to old Mrs. Patterson from town, who showed up with her grandson driving and the bed full of quilts, canned goods, and bread wrapped in cloth. "Heard what happened," she said, climbing down with the stiffness of someone who'd seen 80 winters. "Figured you could use some help." Lila stared at the supplies, too overwhelmed to speak. "We don't have money to pay you back," Cade said carefully. Mrs. Patterson waved a dismissive hand. "Don't want payment. Lila's father helped me when my husband died, left me enough to live on when he could have taken advantage. This is just returning the favor." She fixed Cade with a sharp look. "Besides, word around town is you two stood up to Dalton Cray's men. That takes spine. We could use more spine in these parts." More wagons followed throughout the day. The Hendersons brought lumber from their mill. The Morrison boys hauled fresh water. Even Raymond Morrison from the bank showed up with a wagon full of tools, his expression uncomfortable but determined. "The bank can't officially support this," he said, not quite meeting Lila's eyes. "But unofficially, my family remembers what your father did for this town. Consider this a personal loan. No interest." Lila found her voice finally. "Why? All of you. Why help now?" Mrs. Henderson, a sturdy woman who'd birthed 6 children and buried 2, stepped forward. "Because you fought. Most people around here, we just bend when pressure comes. Pay the protection money, look the other way, tell ourselves it's not our business." She gestured to the burned remains of the house. "You didn't bend. You stood up. That matters." "Even if it brings trouble to your doorsteps?" Kate asked. "Trouble's already here," old Pete from the general store said. "Has been for years. Cray and his men bleeding the territory dry, and all of us too scared to do anything about it. Maybe it's time that changed." Sheriff Bowman arrived around noon, watched the community effort with an expression Lila couldn't quite read. When the wagons finally cleared out late afternoon, he approached where she and Cade were sorting through the donated supplies. "Careful," he said quietly. "What you're building here, it's not just a house." "What is it then?" Lila asked. "A symbol. Something people can point to and say they fought and won." Bowman's face was grave. "That makes you dangerous to men like Cray. More dangerous than if you just killed his men and disappeared." "So what should we do?" Cade's voice had an edge. "Run? Hide? Pretend we don't exist?" "No," Bowman sighed. "You should be smart and very, very careful, because Cray will come at you again. Maybe not this week or next month, but he will come. And next time, he won't be subtle." The sheriff left them with that warning hanging in the air like smoke. That night, they used some of the lumber to build a crude shelter, 4 walls and a roof, barely more than a shed, but enough to keep the weather out. Cade worked with practiced efficiency, his injured arm slowing him down but not stopping him. Lila helped where she could, holding boards while he hammered, passing him nails, learning the rhythm of construction. "You're good at this," she observed. "Had practice. Thomas and I built half a mining camp one summer." Cade's voice went soft with memory. "He was terrible at it, couldn't measure worth a damn, but he tried. You miss him. Every day." Cade hammered another nail home. "He was the only person who ever looked at me and saw something worth saving." Lila wanted to say that she saw it too, but the words felt too large, too presumptuous. Instead, she just handed him another board and kept working. They finished the shelter as darkness fell. It was rough, ugly, barely functional, but it was theirs. Inside, they laid out the bedrolls Mrs. Patterson had donated. There was no partition, no privacy, just 2 people sharing a space barely big enough for one. "I can sleep outside," Cade offered. "Don't be stupid, it's freezing." Lila arranged her bedroll on the far side of the shelter. "We're adults. We can share a room without making it complicated. If you're sure." "I'm sure." She wasn't sure, but she was tired of pretending everything had to be carefully managed, properly separated. They'd killed men together. They'd burned together. Sleeping in the same room seemed almost mundane by comparison. They settled into their respective bedrolls. Outside, wind howled through the ruins. Inside, silence stretched between them. "Thank you," Lila said into the darkness. "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for—" She struggled to find the right words. "For keeping your promise to Thomas, even though it's cost you." "Cost me what?" I had nothing before this. Cade's voice was rough. No home, no purpose, just drifting from one bad decision to the next. At least here, I'm fighting for something that matters. The ranch. You. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. We should sleep, Cade said finally. Tomorrow we start on the real house. Yeah, tomorrow. But Lila lay awake long after Cade's breathing evened out into sleep. She stared at the rough ceiling and tried to understand what was happening between them. This marriage that had started as pure transaction was becoming something else. Something that didn't have a name yet, but felt real in a way the legal papers never had. It should have scared her. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing in her life. The next weeks fell into a pattern of brutal, exhausting work. They rose before dawn and worked until they couldn't see anymore. Cade led the construction while Lila managed the surviving cattle, coaxed the garden back to life, and made runs into town for supplies they couldn't make or borrow. The house took shape slowly. Nothing fancy, a simple structure with 4 rooms, a proper kitchen, windows that actually closed. They couldn't afford glass yet, so they used oiled paper that let in light but kept out the worst of the weather. People continued to help, but cautiously now. Word had spread about what happened, the attack, the bodies, the fact that Lila and Cade had stood their ground. Some folks in town looked at them with respect, others with fear. A few with outright hostility, as if defending yourself was somehow worse than dying quietly. One afternoon, Lila was in town picking up nails when she overheard 2 men talking outside the saloon. Heard Cray put a price on Voss. $2,000, dead or alive. That's a lot of money for one man. It's not about the money, it's about the message. You don't walk away from Cray's organization. You don't kill his men and get away with it. Lila's blood went cold. She finished her purchase and headed back to the ranch, her mind racing. Cade was on the roof when she arrived, hammering shingles into place. She waited until he climbed down before telling him what she'd heard. He took it better than she expected, just nodded, wiped sweat from his forehead, and went back to work. That's it? Lila demanded. There's a price on your head and you're just going to keep building? What else should I do? Cade's voice was calm. Running won't change it. Neither will worrying, so I might as well be useful. Cade, Lila. He turned to face her fully. I've known since the moment I refused Cray that this was coming. A bounty just makes it official. Changes nothing about what we need to do. Which is what? Stay alert. Keep our weapons close. Trust no strangers. He picked up his hammer again. And finish this house before winter really hits. It was practical advice delivered in Cade's typical flat tone, but Lila could see the tension in his shoulders. He was more worried than he was letting on. That night, she woke to find his bedroll empty. She grabbed her rifle and slipped outside, half expecting to find attackers in the darkness. Instead, she found Cade sitting on a half-finished porch, staring out at the mountains silhouetted against the starlit sky. Couldn't sleep? She asked, sitting down beside him. Too quiet. Makes me nervous. You prefer being shot at? At least when people are shooting, you know where they stand. Cade's voice was tired. It's the waiting that gets to me. Wondering when the next move comes. Who's going to try to collect that bounty? Lila set her rifle across her knees. We could leave. Take the money we have left. Head for California or Oregon. Start completely over. You'd do that? Leave your father's land? I'd do that to keep you alive. The admission surprised them both. Cade looked at her, and in the starlight his expression was unreadable. I don't deserve that, he said quietly. Stop deciding what you deserve. I'm tired of hearing it. Lila's voice was sharp. You're my husband. Whether we planned it that way or not, whether it's real or convenient, that means something. At least it does to me. What does it mean? It means I'm not letting Dalton Cray or anyone else take you away without a fight. She met his eyes. It means you're not alone in this anymore, so stop acting like you are. Cade was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her cold fingers. Thank you, he said, for that, for everything. They sat together on the unfinished porch, hands linked, and watched the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were planning dangerous things. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. That would have to be enough. The house was nearly finished when the first bounty hunter showed up. Lila spotted him from a distance, a lone rider approaching at midday when honest folks were usually working. She called for Cade, and they watched for cover as the stranger dismounted about 50 yards out. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of confidence that came from not knowing how quickly things could go wrong. His guns were too shiny, his clothes too clean. "Cade Voss," he called out. "I know you're in there. Come out and we can settle this peaceful." Cade and Lila exchanged looks. "You want me to handle this?" Cade asked. "Let me try first." Lila stepped out before he could argue. "Can I help you?" The young man looked surprised to see a woman. "Where's Voss?" "That depends. Who's asking and why?" "Name's Billy Hendricks. I've got paper on Cade Voss, $2,000 for his capture." Billy's hand drifted toward his gun. "Don't make this difficult, ma'am. Just send him out." "And if I don't? Then I'll have to come in and get him." "Bad idea," Cade said, stepping out beside Lila. His rifle was cradled casually, but his finger was near the trigger. "Real bad idea." Billy's confidence wavered slightly. "The paper says dead or alive, Voss. Your choice which?" "Third option will," Cade said. "You turn around, ride back to wherever you came from, and forget you ever heard my name." "Can't do that. I need the money." "Everyone needs money. Not everyone's willing to die for it." Billy's hand twitched toward his gun. It was a mistake. The movement of someone who'd never been in a real gunfight, who thought fast was the same as good. Cade's rifle came up in one smooth motion. "Don't," he said flatly. Billy froze, his hand halfway to his holster, suddenly realizing how outmatched he was. "I'm going to give you a chance I probably shouldn't," Cade continued. "You're going to mount that horse and leave. You're going to tell anyone else thinking about collecting that bounty what happened here. You're going to spread the word that trying to take me is suicide. You understand?" Billy nodded jerkily. "Good. Now go." The young man practically ran to his horse. He mounted with shaking hands and rode off at a gallop, kicking up dust in his panic. Lila lowered her rifle, which she'd raised without thinking. "Think he'll actually spread the word? Maybe. Or maybe he'll come back with friends." Cade watched the dust trail fade. Either way, he won't be the last. The bounty's too high. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more hunters showed up. 2 took Cade's warning and left. The third was older, harder, and decided to try his luck in the middle of the night. Cade was ready. He'd been sleeping light, listening for exactly this kind of approach. The fight lasted maybe 30 seconds. A brief exchange of gunfire, then silence. In the morning, they found the bounty hunter's body near the tree line. Cade dragged it to town himself, dropped it at Sheriff Bowman's office with a terse explanation. "Self-defense," Bowman said, examining the body. "Again." "Again," Cade agreed. "You're building quite a reputation, Voss. The man you can't kill." "That's what they're calling you." "I'm just trying to live quietly." "Quietly." Bowman laughed without humor. "You've killed 9 men in a month. That's not quiet." "They came to me. I didn't go looking." "Doesn't matter. This keeps up. You're going to have every gun in the territory coming after that bounty." Bowman leaned back in his chair. "At some point, the math catches up. You can't win them all." "Maybe not." Cade turned to leave. "But I'm going to try." Back at the ranch, Lila was waiting. She'd heard the shots the night before, had spent the dark hours keeping watch in case it was a coordinated attack. "How bad?" she asked. "1 dead." Bowman filed it as self-defense. Cade sat down heavily on the porch steps they'd just finished installing. "But he's right. This can't keep going. Eventually someone's going to get lucky. Then we end it." Lila sat beside him. "We find Dalton Cray and we end this. He's too well protected. Getting to him would be suicide. So is sitting here waiting for the next hunter to try." Lila's voice was firm. "We need to be proactive. Force his hand somehow." "How?" "I don't know yet, but there has to be a way." She looked at the house they'd built together, at the land they'd defended, at the life they were trying to construct from ruins. "I'm not giving this up. Not for Cray, not for money, Not for anything. Cade studied her profile. When did you get so fierce? When I had something worth being fierce about. The answer seemed to satisfy him. They sat together in comfortable silence, two warriors resting between battles. The solution came from an unexpected source. A week later, a man named Samuel Garrett arrived at the ranch. He was in his 50s, well-dressed but worn, with kind eyes that looked like Thomas's in the photograph Lila had seen. "I'm Thomas's brother," he said when Lila answered the door. "I heard about what happened. About my brother and about you and Mr. Voss. I came to offer my help." They invited him inside. Over coffee, Samuel explained that he'd been searching for his brother for months, following a trail that led him to the mining camp where Thomas had died. "I found his things," Samuel said, "including letters to you, Miss Chen, and a journal where he'd written about Cade, about the promise he'd made." His voice thickened. "My brother was always trying to save people. Looks like he managed it one last time." "I'm sorry for your loss," Lila said quietly. "As am I for yours." Samuel turned to Cade. "Thomas wrote that you were a good man trying to escape a bad life. It seems he was right." Cade looked uncomfortable. "I'm not sure about the good part. The fact that you're still here, still fighting to protect what my brother tried to give you, suggests otherwise." Samuel pulled out a leather folder. "I'm a lawyer by trade. I've been looking into Dalton Cray's operations, building a case. The law hasn't touched him in 10 years, Cade said. "What makes you think it will now?" "Because I have something they didn't. Testimony from someone who worked inside his organization." Samuel opened the folder, showed them documents covered in dense legal text. "I found a man willing to testify about Cray's criminal activities. With his testimony and the evidence I've gathered, we can bring federal charges. Real charges that even Cray's money can't make disappear." "Who's the witness?" Lila asked. "His name is Marcus Trent." The room went very quiet. "Trent's dead," Cade said flatly. "I was there when he died." Samuel's expression didn't change. "Are you certain?" "I watched him stop breathing." "Did you check for a pulse? Verify the body?" Cade and Lila exchanged looks. In the chaos of that night, with attackers fleeing and the house burning, they'd assumed Trent was dead. Sheriff Bowman's men had collected the bodies. But had anyone actually confirmed? "He survived," Samuel said. "Badly wounded, but alive. He's in Denver now, recovering, and he's angry. Cray left him to die, sent no help, wrote him off as expendable." Samuel leaned forward. "He's willing to testify against Cray, but he needs protection. And he needs assurance that Cray will actually be brought to justice." "What does that have to do with us?" Lila asked. "Because the federal marshals need bait. Someone to draw Cray out of his fortified mining camps into the open where he can be arrested." Samuel looked at Cade. "You're the bait he wants most. With the bounty posted, he'll come personally to see you dead. The marshals can grab him then." "You're asking me to offer myself up as a target." Cade's voice was flat. "I'm asking you to help us end Dalton Cray's reign of terror in this territory. For good." Samuel's gaze was steady. "Thomas believed you were capable of great things, Cade. This is your chance to prove him right." Cade stood, walked to the window, stared out at the land he'd helped defend. Lila watched him think, saw the war happening behind his eyes. Finally, he turned back. "If I do this, Lila stays protected. Whatever happens, she doesn't get caught in the crossfire." "Agreed," Samuel said. "And we do this my way. I know how Cray thinks, how he operates. The marshals follow my lead, or I walk. I'll make sure they understand." Cade looked at Lila. "What do you think?" She should have been scared, should have argued against deliberately attracting the attention of a man who'd already tried to kill them multiple times. But this was a chance to end it, really end it. Not just survive another attack, but remove the threat completely. "I think we do it," she said. "Together." "Together," Cade agreed. Samuel spent the next 3 days laying out the plan. Federal marshals would be in position around the ranch. Cade would make himself visible, vulnerable even. When Cray arrived, and Samuel was certain he would, they'd spring the trap. "He's too proud to send more hired guns after you've killed so many," Samuel explained. This has become personal. He'll come himself, probably with his best men. That's when we take him. It was a good plan. Almost too good. On the fourth day, as Samuel was preparing to leave for Denver to coordinate with the marshals, Lila pulled Cade aside. "You don't trust this," she said. It wasn't a question. "I want to." Cade's voice was low, but something feels off. Too convenient. Too neat. "You think it's a trap?" "I think Cray's survived this long by being paranoid and smart. If he knows Trent turned on him, he'll know about the federal case. He'll be ready." Cade's jaw tightened. "And if this goes wrong, you're in the blast radius." "Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong." Lila grabbed his hand. "We've faced worse odds." "Have we?" "We're still here, aren't we?" Cade's expression softened slightly. "You're too brave for your own good." "I learned from the best." He pulled her close, and for the first time since they'd met, he kissed her. It was brief, almost desperate, the kiss of someone who wasn't sure they'd get another chance. When they broke apart, Lila rested her forehead against his. "We're going to survive this," she said. "We're going to end Cray, and then we're going to build our life here. The one we should have had from the start. Promise?" His voice was rough. "Promise." Samuel left the next morning, heading back to Denver with their commitment to the plan. The marshals would arrive in 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks to prepare for what might be their last fight. Lila and Cade spent that time fortifying, planning, preparing for every contingency. But they also spent it living, finishing the house properly, working the land, having dinners that lasted hours because neither wanted the day to end. They were building something real now. Not just a marriage of convenience, but an actual partnership, a life. And when the marshals finally arrived, dusty and serious and armed to the teeth, Lila looked at what they'd created and knew exactly what she was fighting for. Not just land, not just survival. Home. The marshals were nothing like Lila expected. Marshal Thomas Reeves was a compact man in his 40s with gray threading through his beard and eyes that had seen the worst humanity had to offer without going completely cynical. His deputy, a young woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to Lila, though they shared the name, carried herself with the quiet competence of someone who'd had to prove herself twice as hard to earn half the respect. They set up their operation with military precision, positioning men at strategic points around the ranch, establishing sight lines and fallback positions. But it was clear from the start that they didn't entirely trust Cade. "You understand why we're cautious," Reeves said on the second day, standing in Lila's kitchen like he owned it. Former criminal turned informant's husband. It's not exactly a confidence-inspiring resume. "I'm not an informant," Cade said flatly. "I'm bait. There's a difference." "Is there?" Reeves sipped coffee that Lila had made, his expression skeptical. "Because from where I stand, you've got every reason to warn Cray. Tip him off, let him escape, maybe even cut a deal to get that bounty removed." "If I wanted to cut a deal with Cray, I'd have done it weeks ago." Cade's voice was controlled, but Lila could see the tension in his shoulders. "I'm here because I want him gone. For good." "Why should I believe that?" "Because I'm still standing here instead of running. Because I've killed 9 of his men defending this land. Because—" Cade stopped, jaw tight. "Because he has something worth staying for now," Lila finished quietly. "Me. This place. A life that doesn't involve looking over his shoulder every second." Reeves studied them both, his marshal's instinct measuring truth against deception. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. "All right. We do this your way, Voss. But if anything goes sideways, if I even suspect you've compromised this operation, I'll put you in irons myself. We clear?" Crystal. The waiting was worse than the fighting had been. At least during the attack, Lila had known what to do. Shoot, move, survive. Now she had nothing but endless hours watching the horizon for threats that might not come. Cade spent the time teaching her things he probably shouldn't have. How to read men by their movements. How to spot surveillance. How to know when someone was about to draw before their hand ever touched their gun. "You expecting me to become a gunfighter?" she asked after he'd spent an hour showing her angles of cover. "I'm expecting you to survive." Cade's voice was serious. "If this goes wrong, if Craig gets past us somehow, I need to know you can protect yourself." "I've been protecting myself for years." Not from this. Not from someone like Cray. He met her eyes. Promise me that if it goes bad, you run. Don't try to be a hero, just get out and keep going. We've had this conversation before, and you never promised. Lila set down the rifle she'd been holding. Because I'm not making a promise I won't keep. We're in this together, Cade. All the way to the end, whatever that looks like. Even if the end is me dead and you with a chance to escape, especially then. She moved closer, close enough to see the scar tissue through his eyebrow, the lines that violence and hard living had carved into his face. You don't get to decide you're expendable. Not anymore. I get a vote in what happens to you. That's not how this works. Then we're changing how it works. Cade looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression cracked open. The careful walls he'd built around himself, the ones that said he was just passing through, just keeping a promise, just doing what he owed a dead man. Those walls came down. I love you, he said simply. I didn't plan to. Didn't think I was capable of it anymore, but I do. Lila's breath caught. She'd known it, on some level, had felt it in the way he looked at her, the way he fought for her. But hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. I love you too, she said. And that's why I'm not running. That's why we see this through together. He kissed her then, and it wasn't desperate like before. It was certain, a promise that words couldn't quite capture. Deputy Chen found them like that, wrapped together in the middle of the kitchen, holding on to each other like they could anchor themselves against whatever storm was coming. She cleared her throat politely. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got movement. Rider approaching from the east. They broke apart. Cade grabbed his rifle. Lila did the same. Together they moved to the window where Reeves was already watching through a spyglass. Single rider, he confirmed. Moving slow. Could be a scout. Or it could be Samuel, Lila said, recognizing the horse. He was supposed to return today with Trent. They waited, tense, as the rider approached. It was indeed Samuel, but he was alone. And something about the way he sat in the saddle, hunched and defeated, sent warning signals racing up Lila's spine. He dismounted slowly, painfully. When he turned, Lila could see blood on his shirt, a rough bandage wrapped around his ribs. What happened? Cade was outside before anyone could stop him, catching Samuel as he stumbled. Ambush. 2 days out from Denver. Samuel's voice was strained. They knew. Cray knew about Trent, knew about the plan. He sent men. Too many men. We fought, but... He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. Trent's dead. Really dead this time. They made sure of it. Reeves swore. Did they follow you? I don't think so. I lost them in the mountains, doubled back 3 times. Samuel gripped Cade's arm. But they're coming, Cray himself. He told me to deliver a message. He's tired of sending others to do his work. He'll be here in 2 days to finish this personally. How many men? Reeves demanded. He said enough to burn this place to bedrock. Samuel's eyes found Lila's. I'm sorry. I thought we could end this cleanly. I was wrong. They got Samuel inside, tended his wounds. Deputy Chen, who had field medical training, determined that he'd been shot twice, once in the ribs, once in the shoulder. The ribs had cracked, maybe worse. He needed a real doctor. Town's 6 miles, Reeves said. We send him there. We lose a defensive position. We send him there or he dies, Chen countered. Those ribs could puncture a lung any time. I'll take him, Lila said. I know the shortcuts, and I can move faster alone. No. Cade's voice was flat. You're not going out there alone. Not with Cray's men possibly in the area. Then come with me. We'll both go. And leave the ranch undermanned? That's suicide. They stared at each other, locked in another battle of wills. Reeves watched them with the expression of someone witnessing a long-married couple argue over dinner plans instead of life and death. I'll send Chen, he said finally. She's fast, she's smart, and she knows how to handle trouble. You two stay here where I can keep an eye on you. It was the right call, even if Lila hated it. Chen left within the hour, supporting Samuel on horseback, taking the trail that would get them to Dust Ridge fastest. After they left, the ranch felt emptier, more vulnerable, like they'd lost something vital they hadn't realized they needed. That night, Reeves gathered everyone in the kitchen. He had 8 men total now, including himself and Cade. Not nearly enough if Cray came with the numbers Samuel described. "We need to talk about realistic expectations," Reeves said bluntly. "If Cray brings 20 men, 30 we can't hold. The math doesn't work." "So what do you suggest?" Cade asked. "We evacuate. Set up an ambush somewhere we control the terrain better. Draw Cray in and hit him before he knows we're ready." "This is my land," Lila said quietly. "I'm not abandoning it again." "Mrs. Voss, with respect, your land won't matter if you're dead. Neither will running. You think Cray won't chase us? Won't burn everything anyway out of spite?" Lila's voice hardened. "At least here we know every inch, every approach, every hiding spot. Out there, we're just targets." Reeves looked to Cade for support. Cade just shrugged. "She's right. Cray won't stop because we relocated. He'll hunt us down and kill us somewhere we don't have home advantage." He studied the rough map they'd drawn of the property. "We fortify, we prepare, and we make him regret coming here." "You're both crazy," Reeves muttered. But he didn't argue further, just started issuing orders, positioning his men, preparing for a siege. They worked through the night. By dawn, the ranch had been transformed into a fortress. Barricades at every approach, ammunition stockpiled, escape routes planned but not preferred. Lila found herself thinking about her father as she helped reinforce the barn. He'd built this place from nothing, had fought drought and disease and debt to keep it running, had died believing she could carry it forward. She wondered what he'd think of her now, married to a hired gun, preparing to wage war against criminals, willing to kill to defend what was hers. Would he be proud? Disappointed? "You all right?" Cade asked, appearing beside her. "Just thinking about my father, about what he'd say if he could see this. Probably tell you to run, get somewhere safe." Cade handed her a canteen. "That's what any father would say." "Maybe, or maybe he'd understand that some things are worth fighting for." Lila drank, then passed the canteen back. "He always said land isn't just dirt, it's legacy. It's proof you existed, that you built something that mattered. Is that what this is to you? Legacy?" "No." Lila looked at the house they'd built together, at the life taking shape around them. "It's home, and I'm tired of letting people take my home away." Cade nodded slowly. "Then we defend it." They came on the second day, just as Samuel had predicted. Lila spotted the dust cloud first, too big to be a single rider, too organized to be random travelers. She called for Reeves, and within minutes, everyone was at their positions. The riders appeared over the ridge like something out of a nightmare. 23 men by Lila's count, all armed, all moving with the confidence of people who expected to win. At their head rode Dalton Cray himself. Lila had never seen him before, had built an image in her mind of some monster. But he looked disappointingly normal. A man in his 50s with thinning hair and the soft build of someone who paid others to do his violence. Only his eyes gave him away, cold, calculating, completely devoid of empathy. The rider stopped at that same 20-foot mark everyone seemed to favor. Cray dismounted with the stiffness of someone unused to riding. He looked at the ranch, at the fortifications, at the men positioned to defend it. Then he smiled. "Mr. Voss?" he called out. "It's been a long time." Cade stepped out onto the porch. Lila tried to follow, but he stopped her with a look. This was his fight to start. "Cray," Cade said. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "I'm disappointed in you. We had an arrangement. You worked for me. I kept you alive and employed. Everyone benefited." Cray's tone was conversational, like he was discussing the weather. "Then you left. Killed my men. Made me look weak. That's bad for business. You made me a killer for hire. I found something better." "That woman?" Cray's gaze shifted to where Lila stood in the doorway. "She's worth all this death? Worth destroying everything I built?" "Yes." The simple answer seemed to genuinely puzzle Cray. He studied Cade like he was trying to understand a foreign language. "I'll make you an offer," he said finally. "Last chance. Come back to work. I'll forget this whole unfortunate incident. You'll earn well, live well, and your wife gets to keep her little ranch. And if I refuse, then I kill everyone here. You, her, every man wearing a federal badge. I burn the ranch to ash, and then I find everyone you've ever cared about, and I hurt them too. Cray's voice never lost its pleasant tone. I'll make an example so complete that no one ever thinks about crossing me again. You know I can't accept that. I know, but I thought I'd offer anyway, professional courtesy. Cray remounted his horse. You have 1 hour to reconsider. After that, we're coming in. And Cade, I trained you. I know every move you're going to make before you make it. You can't win this. He rode back to his men, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Inside the house, Reeves was running calculations. 23-9, those are terrible odds. Been in worse, one of his men muttered. When? Can't remember, but I'm sure we have. Despite everything, Lila almost laughed. The gallows humor felt appropriate. Cade was studying the enemy positions through the window. He's overconfident. He brought too many men. They'll get in each other's way. And he positioned them wrong. Too spread out to support each other. Too concentrated to avoid crossfire. You sure about that? Reeves asked. I'm sure that Cray always believes he's the smartest person in any room. It makes him predictable. Cade turned from the window. We can win this, but it's going to cost. How much? Some of us won't walk away. The room went quiet, each man processing that reality in his own way. They were lawmen, used to danger, but this was different. This was a last stand. I'm staying, Reeves said finally. This is my job, stopping men like Cray. His men nodded agreement one by one. They'd signed up for this. They'd see it through. What about you? Cade asked Lila quietly. Last chance to run. You know my answer. Yeah, I do. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead. Stay in the house. Use the second floor window we talked about. Don't take unnecessary risks. Same to you. I'm the bait, remember? Risk is kind of the point. Then don't be stupid bait. That almost smile flickered. I'll try. The hour passed too quickly and too slowly. Lila used the time to check her ammunition one more time, to drink water, to steady her breathing, to memorize Cade's face in case she never saw it again. When Cray's men finally moved, they came all at once. The attack was coordinated, professional. 3 groups advancing from different angles, using covering fire and movement tactics that spoke of military training. Reeves's men returned fire, trying to slow the advance, but the numbers were overwhelming. Lila took her position at the upstairs window, just like Cade had instructed. From here, she could see the whole battlefield. She picked her targets carefully, men who got too close, who threatened to flank their positions. Each shot was deliberate, controlled. Below, Cade was moving through the chaos like he was born to it. He fired, relocated, fired again, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted, taking down attackers with mechanical efficiency. But there were too many. For every man who fell, 2 more advanced. Cray's forces were pushing forward relentlessly, absorbing casualties like they didn't matter. One of Reeves' men went down, then another. The defensive line was collapsing. Fall back! Reeves shouted. Everyone to the house! They retreated in fighting order, covering each other's movement. Lila provided suppressing fire from above, buying them seconds they desperately needed. They made it inside and barricaded the doors. Outside, Cray's men surrounded the house completely. They were trapped. Well, Reeves said, reloading with hands that barely shook. This is going great. We hurt them, Cade pointed out. I count at least 8 down, maybe more. And we've lost 3. Math still doesn't favor us. Gunfire poured through the windows. Everyone ducked below the sill line, only rising to return fire when they had clear shots. It was desperate, defensive, exactly the kind of fighting where the side with more men won by attrition. Lila was repositioning when she saw movement in her peripheral vision. One of Cray's men had made it to the house's blind spot on the east side, was planting something against the wall. Explosives, she shouted. East wall. Cade was moving before she finished the sentence. He crashed through the window in a shower of glass, landed hard, came up shooting. The man with the explosives went down. Cade grabbed the charges, threw them away from the house. They detonated midair with a concussion that shook the ground. Cade was already rolling for cover, bullets chewing up the earth around him. He made it behind a water trough, but he was pinned down, cut off from the house with at least 5 men between him and safety. Lila didn't think. She just moved. Out of the second-floor window onto the roof, sliding down the slope with her rifle clutched tight. She hit the ground running, firing as she went, laying down covering fire for Cade. "Get back inside," he shouted at her. "Make me," she shot back, dropping behind cover beside him. 2 of Cray's men were advancing on their position. Lila and Cade fired simultaneously. Both attackers fell. "That was stupid," Cade said. "Probably." Lila ejected spent cartridges, reloaded. "But you're welcome." "We're pinned." "I noticed." They were about to make a break for the house when a new sound cut through the gunfire. Hoofbeats. Lots of them. Riders appeared over the ridge. 20, 30, maybe more. For one terrible moment, Lila thought Cray had reinforcements. Then she saw the lead rider, and her breath caught. Sheriff Bowman, with what looked like half the territory behind him. Ranchers, townspeople, even some of the Morrison family. Armed and angry, and apparently done being afraid. They hit Cray's forces from behind in a rolling wave of righteous fury. The tide turned in seconds. Cray's men, caught between the house defenders and the new arrivals, broke and scattered. Dalton Cray himself tried to run, tried to mount his horse and escape the disaster his arrogance had created. Cade shot the horse, not to kill it, just to drop it. The animal went down hard, throwing Cray to the ground. Before he could rise, Reeves was there, rifle pointed at his head. "Don't move," the marshal said. "Dalton Cray, you're under arrest for murder, extortion, arson, and about 40 other charges I'll think of on the way to Denver." Cray looked up at him, then at the battlefield littered with his fallen men, then at Cade standing 20 feet away with smoke drifting from his rifle. "You can't win," Cray said. "I have lawyers, judges, politicians. You'll never make this stick." "Maybe not," Reeves admitted, "but I'm going to try real hard. And even if you walk eventually, your organization is done. Your men are dead or scattered. Your reputation is ruined. You're finished in this territory." For the first time, Cray's confident facade cracked. He looked genuinely afraid. "Get him out of my sight," Cade said quietly. Reeves hauled Cray to his feet, clapped him in irons, and handed him off to his deputies. Around them, the cleanup was beginning, tending to the wounded, counting the dead, starting the long process of documenting everything for the legal proceedings to come. Bowman approached Lila and Cade where they still stood behind the water trough. "Took you long enough," Cade said. "Had to convince people it was worth the risk." Bowman looked tired but satisfied. "Turns out watching you two stand up to Cray inspired some folks. Figured if you could fight, they could too." "How many did we lose?" Lila asked. "3 on our side, maybe 8 or 10 of Cray's men dead. Rest will face trial." Bowman shook his head. "It's a mess. But it's over." "Is it?" Lila looked at the devastation around them. "Really over?" "As over as these things get," Bowman said. "Cray's done. His organization's broken, and you've got a whole territory's worth of people who owe you a debt." He smiled slightly. "I'd say that's as close to a happy ending as you're likely to get." The aftermath took weeks to sort out. Cray was transported to Denver to await trial. His remaining men were rounded up, charged, processed through a legal system that suddenly found its spine now that the threat was broken. Samuel Garrett recovered from his wounds and returned to help prosecute, using the evidence he'd gathered to build an airtight case. The ranch became something of a landmark. People rode out to see where the final battle had happened, to talk to the woman and her gunfighter husband who'd stood against impossible odds and won. Lila hated the attention, but she tolerated it because it brought business. Ranchers wanting to buy cattle, merchants offering fair prices on supplies. Even the bank came through with a loan extension on favorable terms, Raymond Morrison apparently having discovered a conscience. They rebuilt the parts of the house that had been damaged, fixed the barn again, started planning for the future, real plans that assumed they'd both be alive to see them through. One evening, about 6 weeks after the battle, Lila found Cade standing at the graves they'd made for her parents. He'd been visiting them more often lately, talking to the dead like they might have answers. "What do you tell them?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "That I'm sorry. for bringing violence to their daughter's door, for not being the man they probably imagined for her. Cade's voice was quiet. For loving her anyway, despite all of that. You think they'd disapprove? I think they'd want better for you. Lila took his hand, laced her fingers through his. I think they'd want me happy, safe, building something that lasts. She looked at him. You give me all of that. I'm still a killer, Lila. Still have blood on my hands that won't wash off. Yeah, and I killed too. 6 men at least during that fight. Maybe more. I lost count. She squeezed his hand. We're both damaged, both carrying things we can't put down, but that doesn't mean we don't deserve this. Doesn't mean we can't build something good from the wreckage. Cade turned to face her fully. What are we building? A life. A real one, the kind Thomas would have wanted for both of us. Lila smiled. The kind worth fighting for. I can do that. He pulled her close. I want to do that. They stood together in the fading light. Two broken people who'd found each other through violence and necessity and had somehow made it into something that felt like love. A month later, Cade had to leave. There were loose ends to tie up, testimony to give in Denver, legal proceedings to attend, the formal dissolution of the bounty on his head. Samuel had arranged it all, promised it would take 2 weeks at most. You could come with me, Cade offered. Someone needs to watch the ranch. Lila adjusted his collar, straightened his coat. Besides, you'll be back before I know it. You sure? I'm sure. She kissed him. Go. Give your testimony. Help put Cray away for good. Then come home. Home, Cade repeated, like he was testing how the word felt. Yeah, I can do that. He left at dawn, riding toward Dust Ridge to catch the train. Lila watched him go from the porch of the house they'd built together and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. The days passed slowly. She filled them with work, tending cattle, maintaining equipment, planning next year's planting. The community continued to help, people stopping by with supplies or just to talk, to be part of the story they'd all survived together. On the 10th day, Deputy Chen rode out with news. Cray's been sentenced, she said, 20 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for at least 15. Her expression was satisfied. Samuel's testimony was damning. Combined with the physical evidence and witness accounts, the judge had no choice. And Cade? Lila asked. Free and clear. All charges dropped, bounty rescinded, full pardon for any crimes committed while working for Cray. They ruled it was under duress. Chen smiled. He'll be on the train back tomorrow. Tomorrow came wearing a skin of gray clouds and cold wind. Lila rode into Dust Ridge early. Couldn't help herself. She waited at the station in her mother's blue dress, the same one she'd worn to meet Thomas Garrett all those months ago. The train arrived on time, pulling in with that same screech of metal and belch of steam. Passengers emerged. A salesman. A family. 2 miners. Then Cade, looking tired but whole. He spotted her on the platform and something in his expression softened, all the hard edges falling away. He walked toward her, and this time Lila didn't wait for him to close the distance. She ran, met him halfway, threw her arms around him like she could anchor him there through sheer force of will. You came back, she said into his shoulder. I promised I would. His arms tightened around her, and I keep my promises. They stood together on the platform, holding on to each other while the world moved around them. People noticed. Of course they noticed. The whole territory knew their story by now, but Lila didn't care about the stares or the whispers. She'd just held on to her husband and felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for weeks. Let's go home, she said finally. Yeah. Cade pulled back enough to see her face. Let's do that. They rode back to the ranch together, side by side, the way they'd face everything from now on. The house appeared over the ridge, solid, real theirs. Smoke curled from the chimney where Lila had left a fire burning. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. Simple, functional, home. That night, they sat together at the table they'd built, eating a meal Lila had prepared from the garden that was finally thriving. Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains, but inside they were warm. Samuel wants us to visit Denver in the spring, Cade said. Says there's a ceremony, some kind of commendation for helping bring down Cray's organization. Do we have to go? No. But it might be nice. See the city. Take a real trip together. He smiled. Maybe even enjoy ourselves. That sounds good. Lila reached across the table, took his hand. We could use some enjoyment. We could use a lot of things. Cade's thumb traced circles on her palm. But we've got what matters. What's that? Each other. This place. A future that doesn't involve running or fighting or looking over our shoulders. He met her eyes. That's more than I ever thought I'd have. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd been strangers 4 months ago and were now something that didn't have a simple word. Partners. Survivors. Lovers. All of those and none of those. Just them. Together. Building something from nothing and calling it home. Later, lying in bed with Cade's arm around her and the sound of his breathing steady in the darkness, Lila thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate marriage to save a failing ranch. A dangerous man with a deadlier past. Violence and fire and choices that had seemed impossible at the time. She thought about Thomas Garrett, the gentleman she'd never met who'd started this whole chain of events, who'd seen something worth saving in Cade and had been right, who'd wanted to help Lila keep her land and had managed it even in death. She hoped he knew. Wherever he was, whatever came after, she hoped he knew that his faith hadn't been misplaced, that his final promise had been kept. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness, speaking to a ghost. Beside her, Cade stirred. For what? For staying, for fighting, for being exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know I needed it. Right back at you. His arm tightened around her. I love you, Lila Voss. I love you too. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, safe in the home they'd defended and the life they'd built from desperation and determination and dumb luck. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead. The mountains stood eternal. The land stretched toward tomorrow, full of possibility and promise, and the kind of future neither of them had dared imagine. But they had it now, had earned it through blood and tears and refusing to give up when everything said they should. That had to count for something, had to mean something. Maybe it meant that broken people could still build beautiful things, that violence could end and peace could take its place, that love didn't have to be perfect to be real. Or maybe it just meant that sometimes, against all odds and reason, people survived, and surviving was enough. Either way, Lila had her answer to the question she'd asked herself months ago, standing in the Dust Ridge post office, staring at a telegram that promised everything and delivered something completely different. She'd asked what happened when you married a stranger out of desperation, when you bet everything on a gamble you couldn't afford to lose. Now she knew. Sometimes you got exactly what you needed, even if it looked nothing like what you'd wanted. Sometimes the wrong choice turned out to be right. Sometimes the dangerous stranger became home. Not because it was easy, not because it was clean or simple or anything like what the stories promised, but because you fought for it, because you stood your ground when running made more sense, because you chose each other every single day, even when it would have been easier not to. That was the truth the stories never told. That love wasn't destiny or fate or magic. It was a choice, a hard one, made over and over again in 1,000 small moments that added up to something worth keeping. Lila had made that choice, so had Cade, and now they had tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days stretching forward into a future they'd build together, one stubborn decision at a time. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she'd agreed to marry Thomas Garrett, but it was the one she'd fought for, the one she'd earned. And lying there in the darkness with her husband's heartbeat steady against her back and their land solid beneath them, Lila Chen Voss knew with absolute certainty that it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.